us on the commute between now and then. The number will be the same for the whole show, 788-3093. Let's say good morning to the team. Good morning, Mr. Corey Funk. Corey will be covering the commute on air. He's also our show director. Good morning, Mr. Abby Adeyemi, who's behind the controls of the program, our technical producer, and Abby covers weather and forecasts on the show. And good morning to Mr. Kevin Nipatebo, who is our YouTube producer. And you might be watching the show live throughout the morning. Let's go straight to Heather Wells. This is a significant day in our province, and she's about to explain why in our news headlines. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, a new development in the search for bodies of 2 Winnipeg women. The Manitoba government says potential human remains have been found at the Prairie Green Landfill. Search teams have been working there since December, looking for the bodies of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron, both First Nations women. They are 2 of 4 women murdered by a serial killer. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew calls yesterday an important day and says the next step will be to identify remains. So we'll hear more on that through the show today. And get set to scramble. The city of Winnipeg wants to test out a new way for pedestrians to cross the street, proposing a pilot project for a pedestrian scramble at King and Bannatyne in the Exchange. We'll hear more in our next local news coming up at 6:30.
All right. Nice to have you back, Heather.
Thank you.
Heather Wells back in our news center this morning. Well, Premier Wab Kinew is going to be live on the program today to talk about the significance of the day, also to talk about expectations moving forward and how he is thinking that Manitobans should be viewing this significant development in the story and in the lives of the families in Manitoba, of course, who are directly impacted by this. And so we are going to be hearing from him live at 7:45. He'll join us in studio. So stay tuned for that and much more coming up. But let's get the day started with World Report, which is up at 6 o'clock.
Today on Q with Tom Power.
Jay Douglas is one of the most important names in Canadian music history, but you probably haven't heard of him. He spent years shaping reggae, soul, and R&B in Canada, and now a new documentary finally tells his story. Jay will be here to tell you about his journey from selling out clubs to being almost forgotten.
I'm going to take you on a journey back to the beginning.
That's coming up on Q, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. People in Ontario go to the polls today in the province's first winter election in more than 40 years.
Well, I just want to win. I don't look at the numbers. I just want to win. I want to win a majority.
Progressive Conservative leader Doug Ford called the election early. He says he needs a mandate that will outlast the U.S. president. NDP leader Marit Stiles has been campaigning on health care and affordability.
It is time you had a government that truly respected you the way you deserve to be respected and treated.
Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie is promising to connect every Ontarian to a family doctor.
We will get it done for the people across Ontario.
And Green Party leader Mike Schreiner is promising to build more houses while protecting farmland.
People are struggling to get by, and Ontario Greens are listening.
Polls are open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. The families of 2 First Nations women murdered by a serial killer are still waiting for closure, but there's been a breakthrough in the search for remains north of Winnipeg at the Prairie Green Landfill.
We have found what we believe to be somebody's loved one today.
Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew says it could take weeks to get more answers, but investigators have found what could be human remains. Now forensics experts are trying to make an identification. For more, I'm joined by my World Report co-host, John Northcott. And John, what is the latest on this investigation?
The latest, Marcia, is that search teams will be back on the scene today, likely with a new sense of purpose. The search of the Prairie Green Landfill is believed to be the resting place of Mercedes Myron, 26, and Morgan Harris, 39, murdered, and their bodies left in a dumpster and then carried, police believe, to the landfill. The search task has been enormous, taking months already, covering an area the size of 4 football fields, involving search technicians and now, with the discovery of the remains, forensic anthropologists, Manitoba RCMP, and the coroner's office, as the process of trying to make an identification is now underway. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew.
The team there is very resolute, and the fact that they've consistently done this very tough, literally backbreaking work because you're hunched over for hours a day just speaks to the effort and the heart of people working on this project.
The decision to search the Prairie Green landfill was a controversial one. Remind us of what happened.
Marcia, the search itself, whether it was feasible, safe, or justified, was, you'll recall, an issue in the fall 2023 Manitoba provincial election, when the then ruling Progressive Conservatives took out billboards to argue that the landfill search should not happen. Commute and his NDP argued that they would launch a search if elected, and they were. Reacting to the announcement that investigators have what they believe are in fact human remains, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kyra Wilson said, quote, "The discovery reinforces our commitment of ensuring that no family is left without answers and that justice is served for our stolen sisters."
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Marcia.
John Northcott with me in studio. Public Safety Minister David McGuinty is in Washington today. He will be discussing Canada's fight against fentanyl and at the border. Officials in this country are trying to avoid sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods, and the deadline seems to be shifting. CBC's Cameron McIntosh is in Washington. And Cam, what can you tell us?
So Public Safety Minister David McGuinty is here to meet with senators and senior White House staff at a critical time. The Trump administration is threatening to impose sweeping tariffs of 25% on all Canadian imports, 10% on energy. The deadline is March 4th, so Tuesday. Now, President Donald Trump is accusing Canada of allowing fentanyl into the U.S., says Canada needs to tighten its border security. Canada has responded with a $1.3 billion border plan and has appointed a fentanyl czar to coordinate that response. Now, only about 1% of American fentanyl actually comes through Canada, and every day it seems like the goal line is shifting here. Twice this week, President Trump was asked directly about Canada and those tariffs. Twice he said they'll go ahead. It's just unclear which tariffs and when.
And I was going to do it on April 1st, but I'm a little bit superstitious, so I made it April 2nd. The tariffs go on, not all of them, but a lot of them.
Now, joining McGuinty is the newly appointed fentanyl czar, Kevin Brosseau, and representatives of the RCMP and the Canada Border Services Agency. All of it part of an ongoing lobbying effort to convince officials here in Washington that Canada is making progress.
All right, thanks, Cam.
My pleasure.
The CBC's Cameron McIntosh reporting from Washington. And UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has his work cut out for him as he visits the White House later today. He'll be trying to persuade Donald Trump that lasting peace in Ukraine will only come if Kyiv and European leaders are at the negotiating table along with Moscow. Crystal Gomansing has more from London.
There is no more important relationship.
A charm offensive is clearly part of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's plan as he heads to the White House later today. There's more than $1 trillion in investments between the two countries on the line. And the UK, for now, appears to be dodging tariff threats being hurled at allies by U.S. President Donald Trump. On his first official visit, he must also defend Ukraine and try to coax the president to stay united with Western allies against Russian aggression.
We have said to our European brothers and sisters that they need to take care of this.
Retired four-star General Philip Breedlove was the commander of U.S. European Command when Russia invaded Crimea back in 2014. Under the Trump administration, support for Ukraine is waning, while blame for the war is no longer being attributed to Russia. Breedlove says the U.S. can and should play a role moving forward should there be a peace deal.
First, supplying all of that great intelligence that we have given Ukraine in the past, and we need to give them into the future. And we have air power that could be that backstop.
That backstop was talked about by French President Emmanuel Macron on Monday. Now Starmer is there to reinforce the message.
We share fundamental values of openness, of democracy, freedom of speech, and freedom to pursue the future.
Crystal Gomansing, CBC News, London.
Two-time Oscar-winning actor Jean Hackman has died at the age of 95. Hackman, his wife, and a dog were all found dead at their home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, after police were asked to do a wellness check. Authorities say foul play is not suspected. They say an investigation into the cause of their deaths is ongoing. CBC News is taking a closer look at what provinces and territories are doing to respond to the primary care crisis. It's a special series called The Cure. And today, we're tackling sick notes. Doctors in this country say they're drowning in paperwork. And as Heather Gillis reports, they say the time they spend writing sick notes would be better spent with patients.
Come on, people. These are grown-ups.
A common contagious illness. Doctors like Rita McCracken in Vancouver don't want to write sick notes for that.
And if they have a cold and they are spewing germs and they're making a good call to stay home from work, they don't need to bring those germs into my office to get a note so that you can feel better about them not coming to work.
The Canadian Medical Association estimates doctors wrote 12.5 million sick notes last year. Ontario and Quebec are making moves to curb them. Nova Scotia and Manitoba have created task forces to reduce all administrative burdens doctors face. Dr. Steve Major of Newfoundland and Labrador's Medical Association says it's desperately needed.
I mean, in an average week, I'm probably spending 4 to 8 hours doing paperwork, and that's between forms. So basically, forms that are disability forms, disability tax credit forms, Canada pension forms, lawyers' reports, and then the other half of the time is reviewing information we get on patients.
Western University family medicine researcher Maria Matthews says even electronic medical records could be streamlined.
You know, you might get a PDF from a lab with lab results, but then you got to open it, click it, save it to the right patient. So, you know, there's all these additional steps. It's not automated.
An estimated 6.5 million Canadians don't have access to primary care. And doctors say critically examining the paperwork could be one cure for the healthcare crisis. Heather Gillis, CBC News, St. John's.
Up next in the Cure series, we want to hear from you. This Sunday on Cross Country Checkup, we are asking, how are you coping without a family doctor? The show is live at 4 p.m. Eastern. And that is the latest from World Report, your international and national news. More news anytime, cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Good morning, Manitoba, and hello, Winnipeg. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app and YouTube. Some light snow expected in the city today and heavier snowfalls up around Flin Flon. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning. This hour on the show, we're going to take you to the sidewalks of Winnipeg to hear about what people are thinking about the job the city's done so far with clearing them. And we've had some success with, of course, the melting, which has helped, but it's a little slick underfoot out there. In addition, this hour, we'll talk about a couple of interesting subjects. One of them is iodine deficiency. Some experts say it's time for Canadians to pay more attention to how much we consume. And most of us think iodine, are we talking salt? Why do I have to think about that? So we'll tell you what the latest concern is in this country. And then a little bit later in the program, a question of national identity in a Google search. We're going to talk to a tech expert about why some of our provincial parks were incorrectly labeled and why that had some Canadians upset. So stay tuned. Those stories are coming up and more. But right now to the top story. In Manitoba, and you likely have heard part of this on World Report, but Heather Wells is in to fill in all of our details. Good morning, Heather.
Good morning. Yes, Premier Rob Canute says yesterday was an important day. The Manitoba government says potential human remains have been found at the Prairie Green landfill. Search teams have been working there since December looking for the bodies of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron. They are two of the four Indigenous women murdered by a serial killer. Canute says the next step is identifying the remains. Manitoba Hydro wants to spend nearly $1.4 billion on a new 500 megawatt generating station. It would make power by burning fuel. What sort of fuel has not been decided, but natural gas is on the table. We'll hear more in our next local news coming up at 6:30.
Heather, it's nice to have you back. I heard you had a moment of sincere news irony on the air. Because
oh my goodness.
You were reporting on people being sick, and then you lost your voice, I think.
Well, yeah, my voice was shot, and I was reporting on this surge in influenza cases in Manitoba and how it's putting pressure on the healthcare system. And yeah, I did not have a vaccine. I always intended to get it and just never got around to doing it. And so part of that story was Dr. Rusin saying, go out there and get your shot. It's not too late. Yeah. So that's good advice.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're better. You know what? I did have my shot and I still felt very, very sick last week with what presented like flu for me. So there's a lot going around right now. I think a lot of Manitobans are sick. So I'm glad you're on the mend.
Thank you so much.
It is right now 6:13 a.m. on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app and YouTube. Well, Abby Adiemi is in this morning. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Good morning.
Good morning.
For working with you this morning again. It's an honor.
No,
as
Abby
always.
Listen, it is. We're kind of in that sketchy time where as Corey's probably going to talk about, it's going to be a little sketch when you're traveling because who knows if it's icy or wet. But we're going to have more melting today.
Yeah, more melting. But before I talk about the warm parts of the province, what a lot of people will not want to hear this morning, that's a clipper we've been tracking coming from Alberta. Is going to be hitting Manitoba today. We do have that snowfall warning in effect for a portion of central Manitoba, which will be impacting Flin Flon and surrounding areas. We're tracking about 10 to 15 centimeters of snow expected in that part of the province as this low pressure system moves in from northern Alberta. We're looking at the heaviest snow which will fall in the Pas, and then it's going to flow into Flin Flon and then southeast towards the Burns River. That should taper off by tomorrow morning. So if you're going to that part of the province, travel may be difficult due to slippery conditions on the road, so you want to take care. Now, let's come down south in Winnipeg, -6 at this time. It is mild outside. It's one of those days you want to walk the dogs and you don't really need to have any concern. It's clear also. Don't expect some cloudy conditions today. We have some light snow in the forecast starting sometime this afternoon. We then get some light breeze this morning. That would get breezy later as you get into the day. We warm up to 1 degree later, and then that rain will be changing to light snow overnight with some blowing snow in open areas when it becomes windy. But in summary, Marcy, across board, snow moving in to central and northern regions, while the southern part will see a mix of clouds and, light rain and a mix of snow there that should be melting and impact. But snowfall warning still in effect for Flin Flon.
All right, last couple days of February here. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Corey Funk is in now to look at the commute.
Yes, so far fairly quiet. Haven't heard any major issues. I will tell you, at least the sidewalks are quite slippery this morning, but didn't fall today, so I'll take that as a win. But if you do see something going on out there, if you're walking, biking, driving, give me a call on that CBC commuter line. All new pothole reports welcome, 204-788-3093.
Well, let's go right to our first item, actually, because Corey just mentioned that the sidewalks are really slippery. And the mild weather this week has created not only brown boulevards and wet streets, but yes, some very slick conditions. CBC's Mike Arsenault was out on Osborne Street yesterday to find out how pedestrians have been managing with the icy terrain. And Mary Jane Anderson was one of the people he spoke with.
Well, they're very slippery. There's no sand on it that I can see. And I don't walk out. Just walk from here to Safeway. I don't walk out in this kind of weather.
And I guess you're using a cane. Is that just must be an added challenge? So for folks who need assistance walking, is it even more challenging?
Yes, very much so. There's people that live in a building over there, and there's lots of people that come with walkers. I think, boy, oh boy, I wouldn't be doing that. But and canes, But it's very treacherous. The sidewalk plow has come down. I've seen that, but. I don't see sand on the sidewalks. You can see it on the roads where the cars drive, but how about the people on the sidewalks?
Janice Anton.
I know that Fred Tipping, a lot of folks, so a lot of seniors, people with walkers and stuff. What are you hearing from people in your building?
Nothing much, other than they think it's slippery too.
What are your thoughts on the city and how they're handling it? Do you think they're doing a good job, bad job? Are you indifferent?
I don't think they're doing a very good job at it.
And why is that?
Because when I went to the bank, I fell and almost broke my face. But I'm okay.
So you've already slipped in this weather? When did that happen?
Just this morning, when the cab took me to the bank. I'm fine though. I'm okay.
My first name is Bojana.
And your last name?
Kenasevich.
We've had a quick thaw here. It's been pretty slippery and icy. What's your assessment of the sidewalks right now?
I think if, able-bodied and have proper footwear, it's manageable, it's passable, it happens every year, you kind of have to deal with it. I feel for people who struggle with mobility. Just saw someone on their way to Safeway and thought, that looks sketchy. It's not awesome, but I'm not sure that there's much we can do about it other than just persevere and help each other out.
The city's obviously sanding and salting as fast as they can. Are you happy with the progress they're making, unhappy, indifferent?
I feel like they're doing the best they can. Yeah, I'm fairly confident there isn't someone sitting there in an office thinking, let's just take our time.
My name is Aaron.
And your last name?
Nolan. It's actually not too bad right now. They were out all night clearing everything, and it seems to be going pretty well, actually. In previous years, there's been horrible ruts all the time, and I feel like they're actually taking care of it right now.
Have you noticed it's been slippery, or even in these last few days, just a bit of maybe watching your step, being a little more cautious?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe it was a bad choice wearing my Doc Martens today, but I might take a little spill. But yeah, it is definitely slippery out, and everyone should be a little careful. Sometimes walking on the boulevard, honestly, is the best course of action, or even walking on the brand new bike lane.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of people doing that. How do you feel about the city's working to sort of manage all this? Good, bad, indifferent?
I mean, it'll happen pretty quickly, and I know if you don't take care of it right away, there'll be a lot of flooding possible if you don't take care of the drainage lines and whatnot. I think they're doing a good job so far. I mean, I don't drive, so I can't speak for other areas, but it's good here.
But the walkability is good.
Yeah, so far.
That was CBC's Mike Arsenault speaking with some people in Winnipeg about the icy sidewalks. I know some of you were saying, oh, come on, it's been a day. Give us a chance to get used to the ice and give us a chance to get used to the potholes and such. But it is, of course, the beginning of the spring season.
Hey, Winnipeg, the CBC Kids News contributor search is on, so get ready to shine.
We're looking for new talent to join our team, and we're coming to your city.
If you're the parent of a 9 to 15-year-old who loves making videos and is an amazing storyteller,
come meet our hiring producers at CF Polo Park on Saturday, March 1st from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m.
To learn more, head over to cbckidsnews.ca/Winnipeg.
Who knows? This could be the start of something great.
Fun. Give it a shot. Put your name in the ring. 6:20 a.m. is the time right now. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is CBC's Information Radio. -6 right now in Winnipeg, mainly clear. Cloudy over in Brandon and -5. And Thompson's mostly cloudy and -24 this morning. And as Abby's been saying, we have been watching that clipper. It's going to move into central Manitoba. Flin Flon, Cranberry Portage, expecting about 10 to 15 centimeters of heavy snow. And that is that low pressure system coming from northern Alberta that's going to continue to spread across central Manitoba throughout later this morning. Well, next on the show, we probably don't think a lot about iodine, but iodine deficiency was once the source of a variety of health conditions until the solution found its way onto our kitchen cabinets and onto our tables. The introduction of iodized table salt proved to be a public health success, but experts worry that the issue of iodine deficiency is beginning to creep back in across the population. Now, to talk about this, Phil Brits-McKibben joined us. He's a professor in the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology at McMaster University, and I spoke with him yesterday.
Yeah, good morning, Marcy.
So why is it important to consume enough iodine, and what are the effects of deficiency?
Yeah, good question. So iodine is considered a trace micronutrient that's required for the production of thyroid hormones that our thyroid gland produces. And the thyroid hormones play really critical roles for general growth, development, cognition, metabolism in general. Unfortunately, most of the iodine, all the iodine, our body cannot produce itself. So it's externally derived, primarily from dietary sources. So the problem also includes that many food sources lack iodine or very poor sources of it. So it's only limited to certain types of food products. In terms of the health impacts of iodine deficiency, it depends on the severity and if it's chronic or not. Historically, chronic severe deficiency was a telltale sign for that was the development of so-called goiter, which is a swollen thyroid gland that was quite evident with the neck being swollen per se. And that was often associated with severe intellectual impairment and stunting of growth. So those were really telltale signs of severe deficiency. We don't see that commonplace nowadays because of this iodinized table salt program intervention that was quite successful. Mild to moderate deficiency, though, it's a bit more insidious because it's less specific. This includes generally weight gain, fatigue, dry sort of skin, maybe memory lapses per se. So those are very difficult sometimes to associate directly to just mild to moderate deficiency, unfortunately.
Well, where does iodine come from in our diets?
Yeah, I would say good sources of iodine are limited, but they tend to be found in seafood products, fish included, and probably the richest source of iodine includes seaweed products. So this is the reason why consumers in Japan and South Korea tend to have excessive intake of iodine because of the prevalence of fish and seaweed consumption. Other than that, in Canada, other sources of iodine include dairy products, in some ways sometimes accidental based on farming practices. If they use iodine as like a disinfectant when they're cleaning the udders of the cows during milking processes, or they use fortified iodine in their feedlots. So it's kind of not standardized. It can be quite variable, but dairy is a good source as well. And then, of course, the use of iodinized table salt, and this is maybe essentially the problem nowadays, is many people these days are maybe not purchasing iodinized table salt, or they're not cooking at home with iodinized table salt because of the use of, say, ultra-processed foods, which are usually not mandated to use iodine.
It's so interesting because, like you're saying, a lot of us may not even have had this on our radar. So in the scope of public health, how successful was the iodized salt initiative in Canada?
Yeah, very successful. And this is not limited to Canada, but worldwide, most countries do have either a voluntary or, in many cases, a mandatory universal salt ionization program for the past several decades. And it's the leading sort of way to prevent, again, the biggest risk groups usually are women who are pregnant and their children, young children, because of this impact on pregnancy, can increase risk for stillborn births and other pregnancy complications, as well as, again, intellectual impairment of children as well. And this way, again, you can see that having adequate iodine, especially if you're a mother during pregnancy, during a critical phases of brain development, that's really the biggest impact these type of policies have, is to prevent these types of impairments that are completely reversible if the mother is adequate in her maternal nutrition for iodine.
So just to reiterate, can you share more about why we're seeing concerns around deficiency now?
Yeah, I think there's definitely multiple factors at play. First and foremost, I think the change in dietary patterns, with more people here in Canada probably consuming, eating out or consuming ultra-processed foods, which tend to be, again, salty, but food manufacturers are not mandated to use iodinized table salt, so they tend to lack iodine. Other trends include the prevalence of alternative sort of salt products, such as Himalayan salts or sea salts of all varieties. They tend to have inadequate, if not any, sort of sufficient levels of iodine because they're not fortified on purpose per se. Other trends include people are maybe consuming less dairy, looking at alternative milk products such as soy or almond milk. They're not fortified with iodine, so they're very poor sources of iodine. And if you have restricted diets, as if you follow veganism or vegetarianism that refrain from seafood or dairy intake, you're also at risk for deficiency as well.
And how big of a problem is this across Canada right now? Do we know deficiency?
Yeah, in fact, our research group was involved with basically a survey, a national survey, and one way to assess the population iodine nutritional status is to collect urine. Since most of the iodine we consume, part of it, a small fraction of it, is absorbed by our thyroid gland, but most of it is excreted in our urine. So by measuring the urinary iodine concentrations in a large population, we can get a good assessment of the iodine, let's say, nutritional status. And the good news for at least Canadian adults that we surveyed, that overall there was good optimal iodine intake on a population level. Although what was surprising with our data, we did find a lot of regional disparities, differences in iodine nutrition, depending on where you lived, which probably coincided with the type of diets and other lifestyle factors at play as well, such as dairy consumption and access to iodinized table salt. One other thing to note, it's very complicated. You might be adequate in your iodine consumption, but at the same time, if you're exposed to these so-called iodine uptake inhibitors from environmental exposures, they can block or impair the uptake of iodine. So it's a very complex problem. So you can see sort of interplay of sort of both changes in dietary patterns, but also environmental exposures that can impair, again, our ability to absorb and uptake iodine from the diet.
We're all going to be reading our salt boxes differently after this interview and trying to learn more.
Exactly. If the listeners can, at least when they're shopping, just take a look at the ingredients on their table salt they purchase, ensure that it's an iodinized table salt itself. And then I think common sense in terms of trying to have a diverse diet that includes seafood and dairy, and try and cook more at home using iodinized table salt. So pretty simple measures, really.
Appreciate having you on about this.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
That is Phil Brits McKibben. We spoke with him yesterday. He's a professor in the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology at McMaster University. I'm Mercy Marcusa. You're listening to CBC's Information Radio. We're live in downtown Winnipeg, and stay tuned because Heather Wells is in with our news at 6:30 this morning, and she'll have an update on our top story today, which is comments from Premier Wab Kinew and what he had to say after possible human remains were now found at the Prairie Green landfill. So obviously a significant an important development, and we'll hear more about the details coming up at 6:30. Right now, a little bit of music for you on CBC from Avenoir and Maz B. They're both passionate about R&B music, and they've joined forces for a track that's a bit of a breakup tune. It's about trying to detach from a toxic relationship. So we'll ease you in this morning with a bit of a breakup tune. It's called Crisis Evasion.
Don't make this hard for me, babe. You made it hard enough. Don't make this hard for me, babe. I'm in love with you, everything, but I ain't interrupted, famous, patient. Do nothing less than on and messy me. Lessons never seem to teach you a thing, but you're the worst kind of blessing that I cling to. Just wake me up from this, baby. I move the dancing alone. Oh, under the sun is the cold. See me once for a fool and now hold on. Don't make this hard for me, babe. You made it hard enough. Don't make this hard for me, babe. Turn into a running man at any chance I hide from the problem. Oh, only time you reached out was your hand in my pocket. I just agree. You did the things you said you never do. Had ultimatums out the roof. Crisis evasion I left, but it's up to you under this I can. Don't make this hard for me, man.
Crisis Evasion from Avenoir and Masby. You're listening to CBC on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app and YouTube, easing us into our Thursday morning. It's time right now for your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 6:30, it is -6 right now. It's going to be another mild one. We're headed to a high of 1, but it gets windy this afternoon and expect some periods of light snow this afternoon as well. After nearly 3 months of searching the Prairie Green landfill for 2 First Nations women, possible human remains have been found. The Chief Medical Examiner's Office and RCMP are working to identify the remains found yesterday. It is believed Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron are in the Prairie Green landfill. They are 2 of 4 women murdered by serial killer Jeremy Skibitsky in 2022. Hilda Anderson-Piers is with the National Family and Survivor Circle, which includes family members of missing or murdered Indigenous women.
This brings them some form of peace to be able to recover their loved ones' remains and to be able to hold them in ceremony and honor their lives and to be able to grieve together collectively as a family and a community.
The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs described the discovery as a painful but significant moment. As forensic work is now underway, Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew says there is still a lot of uncertainty.
I hope there is closure coming for one family because of the news of today, but we know that we have to keep working for the other family, and potentially, again, with that uncertainty, we may have to continue the work here.
Canute says the search will continue today at Prairie Green Landfill. In other news, Manitoba Hydro wants to spend almost $1.4 billion on a new fuel-burning generating station. As CBC's Bartley Kivas reports, it might run on something the NDP government has promised to phase out as a source of electricity.
Manitoba Hydro has a plan to build a pair of fuel-burning turbines to generate 500 megawatts of electricity on demand. Spokesperson Peter Chura says the extra power is needed to prevent the province from running short of electricity in the dead of winter.
Our winter peak load capacities are getting higher and higher, and we've already estimated that we're probably going to need more capacity in order to meet those winter peak loads by 2029, 2030.
Hydro wants to get going on the plant soon. It hasn't decided on a fuel. Natural gas is on the table, even though the NDP government has promised to wean hydro off fossil fuels by 2035. Adrian Sala is the minister responsible for hydro.
This is focused right now on ensuring that we meet our energy needs here in Manitoba, that we keep energy as affordable as possible.
Other potential fuel sources include hydrogen and renewable natural gas, which comes from the likes of compost or sewage. Both of those options may come with higher costs than natural gas. Bartley Kivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
The city of Winnipeg wants to test out a new way for you to get across the street. It's proposing a pilot project for a pedestrian scramble at King and Bannatyne in the Exchange. It would allow pedestrians to cross in all four directions all at once. Other cities like Toronto already use scrambles, which advocates say improves safety and reduces delays. Janice Lukes chairs the city's Public Works Committee.
The city has not done a pedestrian scramble before, so the city selected this one because this location, King and Bannatyne, because they felt it included pedestrians, cyclists, vehicular traffic.
The committee will vote on the proposal at its meeting next week. If approved, the project would begin this year, with a report expected by spring of 2026. Well, the warm snap in Winnipeg has caused a quick melt that's left rough patches of ice and slush on many sidewalks. The city says it doesn't remove ice from sidewalks. Instead, it applies sand to improve walking conditions. Melissa Graham at the Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities says that creates challenges for people with mobility issues. The League has created a snow plow campaign to flag unplowed sidewalks to the city.
Last year, our goal was just to get the attention of the city. This year, we've actually found from the city that the photos and stories we collected were really helpful. So we have a contact at the city we can send them directly to. And they find that really helpful, I think, for training their operators.
Graham would like to see the city update their snow clearing policies to keep up with mid-season thaws. Well, we have some breaking news from overnight. The legendary American actor Jean Hackman has been found dead, along with his wife and their dog. Their bodies all discovered in New Mexico during a welfare check. Hackman played many memorable film roles, including the villain in Superman.
Lex Luthor. Possibly you've heard the name, the greatest criminal mind on earth.
Jean Hackman won 2 Oscars for The French Connection and Unforgiven. Foul play is not suspected in his death, but we do not yet know the circumstances. Jean Hackman was 95 years old. You can hear more national and international news on World Report at 7. And 11 straight wins.
To the net scores!
Cole Perfetti with the first goal of the game on Sportsnet as the Winnipeg Jets beat the Ottawa Senators 4-1. Head coach Scott Arniel says it was a scrappy start and not the prettiest win.
Pretty sloppy. Just, you know what, it's bound to happen. We couldn't make a play. We weren't connecting. We did a lot of things that are uncharacteristic of us. But at the end of the day, it was we played a lot better in the third.
So the Jets take the win and stay on the road. It's Winnipeg in Nashville tonight. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Jean Hackman's one of the few, stars that I ever saw in person.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was on an overseas cruise. It was like on the QE2 many years ago. I guess around late 90s. And he was on this cruise. And so when you would go for like the evenings, and it was a jazz cruise, so there would be like a band playing. And I found myself sort of sitting with my girlfriend on vacation with my friend. And then across from us was Jean Hackman, and and it's funny because I found myself trying not to stare at him, because you automatically do look, and then you think, oh, you're reflecting in your head, they look the same as they do in person, or they're taller, shorter, or whatever. And then I found myself being like, he's on his personal vacation, like, don't stare at him. But I thought, what
I can't look away.
I know, and you could see the whole crowd looking at him. So what must that be like? But yeah. So,
what an incredible actor, though, hey?
Absolutely. And that was right around, remember Hoosiers? That's for me the one that I'll rewatch.
Do you know what? There's so many movies he was in. Wasn't he in Blazing Saddles? There were just so many.
He might have been in Blazing Saddles. Yeah, but as you said, French Connection, and yeah. All right, thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
Heather will, of course, be with us throughout the morning. It's time, though, for us to get serious about what's happening in terms of the weather forecast, because we do have a system moving into part of Manitoba. Abby is here now with our regional forecast for CBC.
Good morning once again. Across board, we're looking at a mix of clouds, snow dominating the forecast today, with snowfall warning in effect for parts of central Manitoba and frigid temperatures in the northern part of the province. Looking at temperatures in the Red River Valley region, Winnipeg at this point sitting at -6, and that's what we're seeing in surrounding areas. We do have light snow starting sometime this afternoon. We warm up to a high of 1 degree, and then tonight that the rain we will get along the way would be switching over to snow, with some blowing snow possible as we get into the overnight period. Similar conditions we're seeing in the Pembina Valley region. Temperatures in Modern Winkler Morris all the way down to Altona, hovering around -1, -2 at this time. West to Brandon, currently -7 we're tracking. For the Westman region today, we do have a mix of sun and clouds with a high of 2 degrees. And then tonight, some partly cloudy conditions. We do have that slim chance of flurries and blowing snow also being tracked to that part of the province. Down in Dauphin and the Parkland region, we are seeing temperatures around -6 with cloudy skies. It's going to stay cloudy for most of the day. There's a very slim chance of light flurries today. Then we'll see some rain showers later on, and this might make a transition to freezing rain sometime this afternoon. That rain will definitely stay into the overnight period. In Gimli, temperatures around -9 for the Interlake region today, mostly cloudy. Snow will be beginning around noon period. We warm up to 0 for folks in Gimli, and then that snow continues with blowing snow overnight. In the Power Flin Flon, currently -12, where we have that snowfall warning in effect, impacting mostly Flin Flon and the Power. It begins as you start this morning. It's going to get heavy at some point. We will see about 10 to 15 centimeters once this passes through the region by tomorrow. Expect more snow into the overnight period. Up in Thompson, -24, we're looking at mainly cloudy conditions. There's a slight chance of snow. We get to a high of -16, though the wind chill this morning is still something to take into consideration. It feels like -27 this morning, and then tonight you'll feel the wind chill get close to -37. Further north in Churchill, -33, we're tracking some ice crystals falling in that part of the province. We have a sunny day in the forecast. However, it's going to be frigid. Highs will be around -26, but that bitter wind chill that feels like -48 will be hanging back for most of the day. So down south, light snow arrive around the lunch break, and then that will turn to a wintry mix tonight. The central part of the province facing heavy snow with warnings in place, and then up north we're seeing that cold temperatures in Thompson and Churchill. But right now, Winnipeg, we are at -6, warming up to +1.
All right, thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Corey Funk, I didn't even ask you, did you run this morning, or did you bike?
I did. I ran in.
How was it?
It was good. I didn't fall. So that's all you could really ask for.
That's, yeah.
It was pretty slippery though on the sidewalk. So definitely that's my tip for folks. Look out, or maybe get a little bit of some grippier shoes if you
Anything else in the commute?
Yes. La Jamodière and Springfield, the lights are flashing red right now. So treat that as a four-way stop. Might be a little slow going through there. But if you do see anything else going on, give me a call on the CBC commuter line. That number 204-788-3093.
All right. Thank you, Corey Funk.
Thank you.
Let's get into what's happening with business news this morning. Crystal Ramlakan joins us now. Good morning to you.
Hi, good morning, Marcy.
So there is confusion right now as to whether or not the U.S. is going to impose tariffs on Canadian imports next week. Let's get out the calendars, and can you break this down for us?
Yeah, you know what? If people are confused, it's really not surprising. There have been multiple threats and different deadlines. So at first, President Donald Trump said he was going to impose widespread 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Then they were delayed a month. Then they were going to come into effect March 4th, so next week. Then he said April 2nd. But with that date, it wasn't clear if he was granting another delay or if he was conflating the Canada-Mexico levies with reciprocal tariffs. Then his aides had to clear things up and have said the deadline is still March 4th, and Trump has not decided whether to give an extension yet. So what can Canadians expect? Well, it's unclear if broad tariffs are coming next week. Different threats could affect Canada over the coming weeks, involving aluminum, steel, and possibly other products. And you know what? This confusion might actually be intentional in the run-up to the renegotiation of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. So creating uncertainty is a long-standing Trump policy, pretty much. And there are early signs that scared companies are reacting exactly the way Trump would like, by shifting production to the U.S.
Let's switch gears here. More than 130,000 electric stoves, I understand, are now being recalled in Canada. What can you tell us about this?
Yes, so Health Canada says there is a risk of fire with a number of LG freestanding electric ranges. And the agency says the knobs on the front of the ranges can be turned on by accidental contact by humans or pets. So there have been 8 reports of incidents here in Canada and 2 reports of injuries, including 1 minor cut and 1 minor burn. So more than 137,000 units of these affected stoves were sold in Canada between 2016 and last June. And you can look inside the oven door or storage door to find the model number to see if yours is part of the recall. We have a story at cbc.ca/business that you can find that information. And if it is, the advisory says customers should immediately contact LG Electronics Canada, but they can continue to use the range. And Marcy, people are not going to get free stoves out of this. Instead, customers are going to receive a free warning label that reminds people to use the lock function on the control panel to disable activation of the heating elements when the range is not in use. And the company also urges customers to view an instructional video on how to use the control lock.
That's very interesting that the label that warns that their product's defective is the fix for this. We'll see, whether or not that's going to hold as a response. Before we look at numbers this morning, how are media and telecom companies in Canada trying to deal with the competition of streaming right now?
Well, they are asking the CRTC to ease up on regulation. So the country's broadcast regulators holding consultations on how the Canadian broadcasting system can survive. And it's part of the work of the regulators is doing to implement the Online Streaming Act, which updated broadcasting laws to capture online platforms. So the CRTC launched the consultation as Canadians, of course, are moving from traditional broadcasting and cable, which is subject to various CRTC rules and regulations, to streaming services, which are dominated by international giants like Netflix, Amazon, and Disney+. So Rogers and others say they are struggling to compete, and some rules put them at a disadvantage, such as mandatory distribution of some TV channels, how providers have to package TV channels and cable offerings, and the requirement that TV providers offer a $25 basic cable package.
What are the numbers telling us today?
In Europe, stocks are falling as President Trump threatens to impose 25% tariffs on imports from the European Union as well. So Germany is down, the UK is up, France is down. In Asia, markets are mixed. Japan is up, Shanghai is up, Hong Kong is down. Oil is up 80 cents to $69.42 US per barrel. Gold is down $32.40 to $2,883.60 US per ounce. And the dollar is down 0.02 of a cent to 69.7 cents US.
All right, Crystal Ramlakan, thank you. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay, thanks, Marcy.
That is Crystal Ramlakan at our CBC Business Desk. Still ahead And this half hour of the show this morning, Mapping Canada. We're going to hear why Google had labeled some of our country's provincial parks incorrectly and why that matters. So stay tuned. That is coming up in a conversation this half hour. But right now, let's return to our top story in the province today. The province has said now that possible human remains have been found at the Prairie Green landfill. It is quite a development. For months, teams have been searching the landfill for the remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron. They are two of the victims of serial killer Jeremy Skibitsky. Now, Premier Wab Kinew will be with us live in the next hour to tell us everything we know to this hour. But he was with the families yesterday after they made the discovery. And here's what he had to say at a briefing then.
This morning, members of our search teams found human remains at the Prairie Green landfill. I should qualify that and say what we believe to be human remains. They conferred with experts on site right away, and these experts tell us that these are probable human remains. So the RCMP has traveled to Prairie Green landfill and are transporting these remains to the office of the Chief Medical Examiner for identification. In accordance with the protocol that we developed, we've always said families first, and so we developed this protocol with them. We informed the family members of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron right away, and they were on the premises of Prairie Green landfill within a couple of hours. I spent a good chunk of the day there with them, and I want to take this time to really acknowledge their courage and all of the emotions that they've had to live through as this issue played out in the public sphere, and then they had to go through the trial, and then of course through the landfill search to date, which itself has been an emotional process of coming closer to hopefully bringing closure for them around the loss of their loved ones. And as a province, I think it's really, really important for us to reflect on what this says about Manitobans, that we are a province that when somebody goes missing, we go looking. And I think we've always understood that searching the landfill was the right thing to do, but with the disclosure of potential human remains being found today, I think we can also say it was a realistic and a reasonable thing for us to do. So it's significant for Manitobans who've been watching this, who've been talking about it, asking questions about it for the past number of years. But I just want us to keep in mind that this is about two families who have been going through a grieving process in a very difficult, public, challenging way. And so I want to acknowledge their bravery and what they have done to bring us to this point. And also to just say that there is still a lot of uncertainty about what we found today. And what I mean by there's uncertainty around what we found today is, while the experts say that these are partial human remains, we also need to bear in mind we don't know which of these two families are potentially going to receive the news, or potentially another family that is not even perhaps part of the conversation right now. So with so many unknowns right at this point, we do need to keep that respect for this identification process, which is going to take probably up to a couple weeks to play out. If we're up to me, we could do this identification immediately, because of course we know that there are families and members of the public who want to be able to move ahead, but we do have to be respectful of the expertise and the technical requirements to do the identification process right. So an important day for Manitobans, an important day for two families, and an important day also, I would say, for the country.
So that is Premier Wab Kinew, and he was speaking yesterday at a press briefing about finding the possible human remains at Prairie Green landfill. He will join us live this morning. That's coming up in about an hour from now. So just after the 7:30 news, Premier Wab Kinew is going to be in studio with us. So stay tuned, and we'll get the latest that we know this morning. We'll also hear more on World Report, of course, but all Manitobans will know the significance of this. And So much to digest, but as the Premier said, an important day and more for us to think about and to understand. It is now 9 minutes to 7 o'clock on CBC. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio. We're live in downtown Winnipeg on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app, or you might be watching on YouTube. Well, if you are watching on YouTube, then you're going to see Carmi Levy pop up. He's our next guest on the show, and he's here to talk about what's going on with Google, which has now said it's updating how it labels some Canadian locations. Now, that is because some of the locations were listed in its search and map functions as state parks instead of provincial parks. And Carmi is a technology analyst and journalist. And as you can imagine, the situation has some Canadian users upset. Obviously, Carmi, this is because of what Donald Trump's been saying about annexing Canada, right?
Yeah, this has everything to do with Donald Trump. In fact, if we had talked about, if we had looked at Google Maps, looked at the entries for provincial parks even just a few months ago, nobody would have batted an eyelash. This would not have been an issue. But because of what's happening in the U.S., because Donald Trump changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico in the U.S. to the Gulf of America, and suddenly everyone is now watching what Google Maps, Apple Maps, Bing Maps, all the mapping apps will do in response to that. And suddenly what used to be just an administrative thing and an app that everyone uses without even thinking twice about suddenly became a very political issue. And we're looking closely. And certainly that spilled over the border because now here in Canada, everyone's been looking really closely at Google Maps for examples of, the company doing things that might necessarily or might possibly be anti-Canadian, that they're poking the Canadian bear. That isn't the case. But the perception, of course, is there, and it all comes back to the American president.
Yeah, a lot of memes about the Gulf of McDavid last week after the hockey game.
Very much so, and it certainly shows how these apps have become central to our culture. We run our days on them, and so it really is sort of it's a lot more important to our daily routine than we probably might have given it credit for before all of this blew up.
I just have to ask you before we move on to actually talking about the confusion over the Gulf of Mexico story. But I just want to ask you about the app and the parks. And I was just looking sort of online and trying to look at the Manitoba parks to see what it would say. So this is provincial parks, and they would say state. Is it a glitch in the system, or what's our understanding of what happened here then?
It wasn't a glitch. If you looked at the name of any provincial park in Manitoba or any other province or territory in Canada, that it would have still said provincial park, like the name would have still been there in full, unchanged. It's been like that all along. What is at issue here is the category label just below the official name of the park, where it actually said state park. And the reason being, this is the way the data has been architected up until now. The categories of data. Google is an American company. They simply never thought that there was a difference between provincial park and state park. And they just figured, it's the government. They run a park. Then we'll just call it a state park. Just didn't appreciate the subtle differences in language and wording that we encounter from country to country, which is sort of typical of an American tech company. That's how they operate. So it wasn't deliberate. It wasn't political. It was simply the company recognizing that they weren't categorizing their data as precisely as they should have. And they've been doing this all along. It's just no one was noticing before it became a political issue in January.
Is it fixed now?
It is. It's starting to. So I checked just before we went to air, and a lot of the entries that had said state park as a category last week are now just simply park. Whether that becomes provincial and state, not quite sure. Whether they become a little bit more precise over time, not sure. But at least for now, the company is committed to addressing that problem, making sure that what we see in Google Maps is a little bit more precise than it has been.
And can you walk us through then what has been happening with what Trump is doing with trying to change the Gulf of Mexico?
Yeah, so, when he first took office, one of the first things he did was he issued a flurry of executive orders on his first day. And one of them was known as the Restoring Names That Honor American Greatness executive order. And it changed a bunch of place names. So Mount McKinley, which it was Mount McKinley to begin with. The Obama administration changed it to Denali. He changed it back to Mount McKinley and did the same thing with the Gulf of Mexico, said we're now going to call it the Gulf of America. Now, this only applies within the borders of the U.S. U.S. And not outside. And so what ended up happening was everyone's attention then shifted to these apps, saying, okay, will the technology companies follow suit? Will they be, agreeing with the U.S. government? And so a lot of people wrongly accused Google and Apple and others of doing the government's bidding because, they were essentially agreeing with Trump. They weren't. This is the way they operate. They simply follow the convention of the countries in which they operate. And so they weren't making a political decision. They were simply updating the data that the federal government was providing to them in these databases. We tend to think that companies like Google have people who sit in offices and manually update all these place names, but there's no way they could cover all that. It's multiple sources. The government provides a lot of the major stuff, and you and I, end users, regular listeners, we can sign into the app as well, and we can update things like business names and local landmarks. And so there are multiple sources of information, and we tend to think that these companies are behaving in a way that is politically aligned, but in reality, it's a really big administrative task to update that back end. It takes a lot of heavy lifting, and sometimes it just, it looks a little messier than it is.
And just last briefly, Carmi, would it be public outcry in Canada that had any impact on the parks going back and the name being corrected, or would that have come from the feds here?
No, I think this is all Canadians. And in fact, the outcry on social media was loud, and it was heard, south of the border. It was certainly heard at Google's headquarters in California. And I think this is a sign that even as tech companies in the U.S. move away from being held accountable, the government is relaxing rules that require them to behave in certain ways. And it's going to be a very different next 4 years in tech because of it. They're still listening to us, and they're still watching for concern over how they operate. And if we raise enough of a ruckus, they will in fact shrug their shoulders, issue a mea culpa, and then fix the problem. And that certainly happened here.
Super interesting. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Great being with you, Marcy. Thank you.
That is Carmi Levy. He's a technology analyst and journalist. Let's go to Heather Wells in our news center.
The bodies of 2 Indigenous women. The Manitoba government says potential human remains have been found at the Prairie Green landfill north of Winnipeg. Search teams have been working there since December looking for the bodies of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron. They are 2 of 4 women murdered by a serial killer. We'll hear the latest on that. Get set to scramble. The city of Winnipeg wants to test out a new way for you to get across the street. It's proposing a pilot project for a pedestrian scramble at King and Bannatyne in the Exchange. More Manitoba news at 7:30.
-6 could be a little slick underfoot. Call us if you have any issue in traffic, 788-3093. Premier Wab Kinew will join us live in the next hour with the very latest on the story Heather just mentioned. Of course, the top story today, possible human remains in the Prairie Green landfill. So stay tuned. We'll talk with him. Also, we'll talk to a city councillor who is planning on voting no today to some funding that is supposed to come through for the North End sewage treatment plant.
Today on The Current.
Came out to Florida for a week for vacation, and just one of the things we thought we'd come check out is Mar-a-Lago.
Hundreds of thousands of Canadians spend their winters in Florida, but anger against Donald Trump's threats is leading some to say they have had enough. Some Canadians there don't get that, though. They say they love the freedom in Florida. It's coming up on The Current.
The Current with Matt Galloway. This morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Marcia Young. Ontarians will go to the polls today in an unusual late winter election, and it comes following an unusual month of campaigning. Candidates have been enduring ice and snowstorms while canvassing in the first winter election since 1981. My World Report co-host John Northcott has the latest from outside a polling station in downtown Toronto. John.
Marcia, I'm in the rain outside St. Andrew's Centre, a church in downtown Toronto. At this stage, at least, much of this election is about the weather and the weather. It's the first provincial campaign in the depths of winter in decades, and massive snowstorm after massive snowstorm has socked in air travel, frustrated commuters, canceled classes, and made for some challenging door knocking for candidates. In advance of E-Day, advocates for those with disabilities say getting to the polls is a challenge. The City of Toronto, for example, is pledging to make accessibility at voting places a priority. This as more bad weather is set to hit much of the province. Whether it's the snow and slush or voter apathy, Elections Ontario says advance voting numbers are down, with just over 6% of those eligible making the early effort to make their choice. Compare that to the last election less than 3 years ago, when almost 10% of Ontario voters came out ahead of the big day. Well, that's the weather. Then there's the weather. Whether or not U.S. President Donald Trump imposes massive tariffs on Canadian products. The election was called by Doug Ford ostensibly to fight the potential tariffs. About 35% of Canadians live in Ontario, and many of them work in industries that would be hard hit. All of Ford's opponents oppose the possibility of tariffs as well, but argue there are other issues in this campaign: healthcare, education, and housing. Polls are open in Ontario from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Marcia.
Thanks, John. My World Report co-host John Northcott in downtown Toronto in the rain. In Manitoba, people wait to find out whether remains found in a Winnipeg area landfill belong to two murdered Indigenous women. Premier Wab Kinew confirmed the news last night.
We have found what we believe to be somebody's loved one today.
Experts have been searching the landfill. They are looking for the remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron. Both First Nations women were murdered by a serial killer in 2022. The federal and provincial governments each committed $20 million to search the site. Kinew says that was the right decision.
I think we've always understood that searching the landfill was the right thing to do, but with the disclosure of potential human remains being found today, I think we can also say it was a realistic and a reasonable thing for us to do.
Forensic experts are examining the possible remains. They will also work to make an identification. Kinew says that process could take weeks. Inuit families are about to get a formal apology from the federal government. Inuit have been waiting decades. A government-directed relocation program moved their ancestors from their home communities. Juanita Taylor is in Arctic Bay, Nunavut, to see what happens.
Laisha Kavavalk and his wife Tagunak look closely at 80-year-old photos of Inuit around the time when Laisha's father was put on a ship from Kingaite, formerly Cape Dorset, and dropped off at Dundas Harbour, 1,200 kilometers away. The Hudson's Bay Company, with the federal government's approval, recruited Laisha's father and 52 other Inuit from Kingaite, Pangnaktok, and Pond Inlet in 1932. They were sent to Dundas Harbour to hunt, trap, and trade. They were promised to come home in 2 years. But that didn't happen. When the post closed, several Inuit were relocated to Arctic Bay, Fort Ross, and Teloriok, where other trading posts were established. Survivors say they suffered lasting impacts of loss from their land, animals, and families. That's why the Dundas Harbour Relocation Society has been fighting to get this apology. Laisha's daughter, Lucy Kavavalk, is with the society.
So the importance is really the federal government acknowledging that there were wrongdoings and that the whole reason was for Canadian sovereignty.
The Federal Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations will be delivering the apology this afternoon, including announcing a compensation package for more than 200 descendants of the Dundas Harbour relocation. Juanita Taylor, CBC News, Arctic Bay, Nunavut.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer visits the White House later today. He is the second European leader to meet Donald Trump this week as they continue to plead for the United States not to abandon Ukraine. He will be trying to convince Trump that peace in Ukraine will only last if Kyiv and European leaders are at the negotiating table. Crystal Mansing has more from London.
There is no more important relationship.
A charm offensive is clearly part of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's plan as he heads to the White House later today. There's more than $1 trillion in investments between the two countries on the line. And the UK, for now, appears to be dodging tariff threats being hurled at allies by U.S. President Donald Trump. On his first official visit, he must also defend Ukraine and try to coax the president to stay united with Western allies against Russian aggression.
We have said to our European brothers and sisters
that they need to take care of this.
Retired four-star General Philip Breedlove was the commander of U.S. European Command when Russia invaded Crimea back in 2014. Under the Trump administration, support for Ukraine is waning, while blame for the war is no longer being attributed to Russia. Breedlove says the U.S. can and should play a role moving forward should there be a peace deal.
First, supplying all of that great intelligence that we have given Ukraine in the past, and we need to give them into the future. And we have air power that could be that backstop.
That backstop was talked about by French President Emmanuel Macron on Monday. Now Starmer is there to reinforce the message.
We share fundamental values of openness, of democracy, freedom of speech, and freedom to pursue the future.
Crystal Gamansing, CBC News, London.
Two-time Oscar-winning actor Jean Hackman has died. He was 95. Hackman, his wife Betsy Arakawa, and a dog were all found dead at their home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Police had been asked to do a wellness check. Authorities say foul play is not suspected. They say an investigation into the cause of their deaths is ongoing. Hackman was a 5-time Oscar nominee who starred in dozens of films. His 2 Oscar wins for The French Connection and Unforgiven were spaced out by 21 years. The mother of a woman charged with attempted murder is speaking out. She says the attack could have been prevented if her daughter had received the appropriate care for her mental illness. This week, a 6-year-old boy was stabbed in downtown Halifax. The mother spoke to CBC's Kayla Hounsell.
My heart goes out to that little boy.
Andrea Hancock is clear. The well-being of the 6-year-old boy her daughter allegedly stabbed is her priority. She says she feels a responsibility to speak out.
I need everyone to hear this.
Her daughter, 19-year-old Elliot Chorney, is charged with attempted murder. The child is now in stable condition after suffering multiple stab wounds Sunday. Hancock says her daughter has struggled with mental illness since she was a child and is severely unwell. When she turned 18, she refused to take medication. A month before the alleged attack on the boy, her mother says a passerby found her on a bridge, threatening to jump.
The police took her to the hospital to get psychiatric care, and they thought she wasn't a danger to herself and others.
She says police told her it resulted in an altercation with a doctor because Chorney didn't want to be released. She was charged with assault.
I phoned them, actually. I said, you just let a very dangerous person out on the street.
Nova Scotia Health says it can't talk about specific cases, but the decision to discharge or admit a patient with suicidal ideation is based on multiple factors. Archie Kaiser is a law professor at Dalhousie University with a cross-appointment in the Department of Psychiatry.
The law says that a person may be admitted as a voluntary patient if the psychiatrist is of the opinion that the person would benefit.
We have not been able to make contact with the boy's parents. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
And if you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts, you can get help by contacting Canada's Suicide Crisis Helpline. Just call or text 988. And that is the latest from World Report. I'm Marcia Young.
Good morning, Manitoba. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio. We're live in downtown Winnipeg on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on that app and on YouTube. Some light snow expected today. It's -6 in Winnipeg. Now, some heavier snow expected around central Manitoba, and we're going to get more details from Abby Adiemi in a moment on all of that and that system. Well, let's build on the top story today. We're about to hear from Heather Wells about Premier Wab Kinew and what he has to say about the discovery of possible human remains at the Prairie Green landfill. But this hour on our show, in addition to having the Premier on live, we're going to hear from an advocate, a longtime MMIWG advocate, to get her thoughts about this development. So a significant day in our province, an important day. Stay tuned for more. In addition, this hour on the program, Why a Winnipeg City Councillor is frustrated that the federal government is tying money for a sewage treatment plant upgrade that's necessary in our city to zoning changes that will impact Winnipeg neighborhoods. He's planning to vote no today to a vote that is coming up on this funding, so we're going to hear from him in a moment. Right now, though, let's go back to our top story with Heather Wells.
Good morning. Well, Premier Wab Kinew says yesterday was an important day as his government announced potential human remains had been found at Prairie Green Landfill north of Winnipeg. Search teams have been working there since December looking for the bodies of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron. They are two of the four Indigenous women murdered by a serial killer. Kinew says the next step will be identifying the remains. Manitoba Hydro wants to spend nearly $1.4 billion on a new 500-megawatt generating station. It would make power by burning fuel. What sort of fuel hasn't been decided, but natural gas is on the table. We'll hear more in our next local news coming up at 7:30.
Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
All right, Abby Adiemi, take it away.
Snowfall warning for central Manitoba. We're looking at 10 to 15 centimeters once that low pressure system moves in from Alberta. The heaviest snowfall will stretch from the powerful Flon all the way down to Barons River. That should taper off by Friday morning. An accumulation of this rapid system coming may be making travel difficult for a lot of people with reduced visibility and slippery roads. So you need to be prepared for changing conditions once this system moves in for folks in the powerful Flon and surrounding areas. Conditions in Winnipeg, -6 at this time. It is clear outside. Expect some clouds to roll in later with periods of snow starting this afternoon, and we warm up to a high of 1.
Corey?
Lajmore and Springfield lights are flashing red right now, so you treat that as a four-way stop, maybe some backups. Sidewalks are slippery, roads might be slippery too, so heads up. Call me if you see anything, 204-788-3093.
Well, today, city councillors in Winnipeg are going to vote to seek federal funding to upgrade the North End sewage treatment plant. The plant's been in need of upgrade for more than 2 decades. Winnipeg could get $150 million from the federal government to go toward the project. But that means we have to agree to a series of zoning bylaw changes that would make it easier, effectively, to build high-density housing, like fourplexes and row houses, because the feds have tied the pots of funding together. Now, Mayor Scott Gillingham is encouraging councillors to support the measure. Here's part of what he had to say.
I would say get on board. We can't risk the $150 million that has been put on the table by the federal government.
But if they're not on board because they're worried about zoning, do they have a legitimate concern about that? If we just say yes, yes, yes very quickly, we're going to lose some of that ability to have a made in Winnipeg solution. We're going to have increased density in places where maybe neighborhoods or Winnipeggers don't want it.
Yeah, so we're not saying yes, yes, yes quickly. This has been an ongoing and continues to be an ongoing back and forth dialogue with the province, or with the federal government and CMHC. There is a hearing coming up, and a hearing is, a public hearing where the public can have input, and we're trying to find ways that will satisfy, as many councillors as possible, and mitigate some of the concerns that some councillors have, and some concerns that I have as well.
Now, we have been talking to councillors this week about their thoughts on this. My next guest is going to vote against this today. Russ Wyatt is city councillor for Transcona. I spoke to him yesterday about his biggest concerns.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well. So what's top of the list for your concerns here about, putting this through?
Well, if you recall, and some of us have been around longer than others, that about 25 years ago, there was a massive bolt broke at the North End treatment plant, and literally hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of liters of raw sewage were poured into the Red River. It was front page at the time. The provincial government reacted by appointing then the Clean Environment Commission to review the matter and issue a report. And they did an in-depth study on the matter back then. The report came back early 2000s. And the chair at the time was Terry Duguid, who's now our federal minister. And in the report, it gave a number of recommendations. And one of the recommendations that was strongly made in the report was that each level of government should commit to tripartite funding of the North End Water Pollution Control Center upgrades. The last time I checked, Marcy, The project right now at the North End Water Pollution Control Center is at $2.4 billion. So that works out to $800 million from each level of government. What the mayor is asking us to sign on to now falls far short of that. And the sad fact is, if we do not receive $800 million from the province, $800 million from the federal government, the city of Winnipeg, more specifically the ratepayers of Winnipeg, who pay water and sewer rates, are going to see their water and sewer rates go up astronomically over the next number of years, because the shortfall right now, just so you know, works out to $1.8 billion. That's on the city of Winnipeg is on the hook for the $2.4 billion. We're talking billion here, Marcy, not million.
So is this you holding out for more and saying to the mayor, if we settle with this, then that's like telling them that we don't expect what they agreed to back in the day?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, you got to remember, Gary Dewar was the premier, somebody Mr. Canoe admires and looks up to and gets advice from. He accepted Terry Duga's report, okay, that there should be one-third funding from each level of government, because Duguid knew that this was going to be a massive cost, and it wouldn't be fair to the ratepayers of Winnipeg. He was a former city councillor. It wouldn't be fair that they should bear this alone. And so he recommended strongly in his report that the other two levels of government should come to the table with equal funding with the city. That's $800 million. That's $800 million each, based on a $2.4 billion project. Right now, just so you know, by the way, to be fair, the province is already actually at the table for all of the pollution control stuff going on in our North End, South End, West End plant. They're already at the table for $278 million. The feds are at the table for $322 million. That's $600 million, but that leaves us short $1.8 billion on the North End treatment plant.
Now, Mayor Gillingham is saying, we need to get on board to free up this funding. And maybe that's because $150 million may be short of what you're saying, but it's real money on the table that could flow. And we have seen, obviously, as you said, we've been talking about this for a long time. We've seen term after term, we've seen different mayors go through who have been waiting for any kind of funding that could be real to come through. So can you understand why the push may be to go for this?
Yeah, I can understand where the mayor is coming from, but I would suggest to the mayor that, he has a report issued by the provincial government, a provincial senior agency in the provincial government, under a previous NDP government, that actually said the province should be at the table for one-third funding, and so should the feds. And so I would argue that the mayor is letting the provincial government and the federal government off the hook, and he's putting the ratepayers of Winnipeg on the hook. And then on top of that, to your point you made earlier, they're changing our zoning bylaws radically throughout the city to accommodate this pittance of funding, one-time money. We're permanently changing our zoning across the city. That's going to disrupt neighborhoods, very undemocratic, because a lot of people have no clue this is going to happen. They're going to wake up one day and all of a sudden see a fourplex going up beside their house and say, when did that get approved by the city?
So let me stop you
there.
there.
That's what the mayor's promising to do.
Let me stop you there for a second. So first to the issue of the funding and the one-time funding,
Sure.
then I'm going to ask you about the zoning. So the one-time funding, are you? What's to say that you can't go back and get more funding after this?
Yes, you can, but with the issues that are coming forward to the city, the reality is it never happens, Marcy, because, we just got so many issues coming forward, and the mayors come, mayors go, things are forgotten, like I've mentioned this information that has been forgotten for many years ago. And then all of a sudden, but what's not forgotten, okay, is the bill sent in the mail that you get for your water and waste bill, and the water and waste department will come after you for that money or shut your water off. Well, maybe we should be shutting down the provincial government's water here in the province in the city of Winnipeg. They're the ones who committed to this report back in the day.
Now, to your concern about them tying this funding to zoning changes and the other pot of money that we're looking to access for housing accelerator funding, to build housing here. We had the mayor on, of course, but we also had the councillor for St. Vital, Brian Mays, on, who has similar concerns about zoning. But he said he was hopeful that a meeting that was going to be public, and it is in June, I hope I have my facts right, is going to make sure that the public has their say. So it's not that they will wake up one day to a fourplex. So are you
I hear what Councillor Mays is saying, but everybody has very busy lives. Unfortunately, not everybody listens to CBC radio, and there's going to be a lot of folks in the city who will actually be waking up to a fourplex and won't have a clue that is happening, because the city, typically, when you do a rezoning on a property, you have to put a 4x8 sign up I can guarantee you the city is not putting a 4x8 sign up on every lot that's going to be hit by this across the city. They're going to do a blanket rezoning, it's called. A lot of people, there'll be a one-time ad in the newspaper. There'll be a 4x8 sign put up somewhere, maybe a few more. But a lot of folks in a typical rezoning would see the 4x8 sign, and they would know the rezoning's happening. In this case, they will not. A lot of folks who, there's lots of information out there, people getting information from all sources now. And we try to advertise and ensure everybody knows when a rezoning happens on a piece of property, folks know. I think thousands, tens of thousands of Winnipeggers will not know. And yes, it's your responsibility to know these things, but everybody has busy lives as well. I think it's unfair to neighborhoods who have people who care about their neighborhoods, who show a lot of commitment to their community, and that community pride is invaluable. And I think that this undermines that sense of community.
I'm wondering, we're doing a series of different, we're looking at all different perspectives and on this. And Brian Mays was highlighting how this zoning change could be one of the biggest our city has ever seen. That was his language. But we also did something about this so-called missing middle housing, talking about, increasing density and by using existing housing that might be there or building new housing rather, but building new fourplexes and such, somewhere between like a big unit, imagine, and a single family home. To sort of increase density. Do you view increased density as necessarily a negative thing, or could it, is it a necessary part of the picture of increasing our housing in Winnipeg?
I think the issue of the need for Winnipeg to increase its housing supply and densifications, I think, is real. But I can tell you this, that this is all the years that I'm coming up from my 20th year on council. I have done. In the Transcona Ward, you can look at it 20 years ago compared to today. We have done more density. We've done more rezoning, I'd like to say, almost to any other ward in the city. But there's a way to do it. You do it by being open, by consulting with residents, by doing a plan in advance, by doing numerous community meetings. That's what we did when we did the Transcona West Area Structure Plan that facilitated a ton of new housing and density levels along Pegwood Street that are higher than, in some parts of Osborne Village. And so there's a way to do it. This is not the way to do it. The mayor is rushing this through. The federal government's about to die anytime. And he's rushing it through to get what? A pittance of money that falls far short of the amount of money that was promised 20, 25 years ago by the provincial government, no less, by Gary Dewar. So I would call on the Premier and the Mayor, to live up to that commitment and fund this project properly. And if you're going to do blanket rezonings, that's number one. That's the first issue, the treatment plans. The second issue of the rezonings, I think that has to be done properly, and you have to do that in consultation with neighborhoods, which usually means more than one public meeting, open houses. Don't ram this through council without doing that.
Russ Wyatt, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I spoke with Russ Wyatt yesterday after the show. Today, he will vote no, he has shared with CBC, as city councillors vote to seek federal funds to upgrade the North End sewage treatment plant. He is, of course, the city councillor for Transcona.
It's hard for movie theaters to compete with streaming services, so they're offering more, like food and drinks delivered right to your seat, loyalty programs, theme nights, even atmospheric experiences with moving seats, wind, rain, lightning, and smells.
Ew.
Putting the motion in motion pictures on Under the Influence with Terry O'Reilly. Thursday morning at 11:30, 3:30 p.m. in Newfoundland. And on demand on CBC Listen.
7:25 a.m. We are almost through February. Look at that. And lots of melting and a little bit of snow to end the month here. -6 in Winnipeg right now. We'll have some periods of light snow, beginning this afternoon in Winnipeg. Our winds are going to be north 30 and then they'll be coming south 30 to 50 this afternoon. It's going to get a little bit windy and gusty out there. And our high is going to be 1 degree. And we have that snowfall warning that's going to bring 10 to 15 centimeters to parts of central Manitoba late this morning. And that will be developing in the Flin Flon Cranberry Portage area. Well, next, it's time for morning sports on CBC with Scott Regehr joining us now to talk hockey. Good morning.
Hey there, Marcy.
So it was not the prettiest, but the Jets still got a win out of last night, and they keep their franchise best winning streak going.
Yeah, it's sitting at 11 games and counting at the moment after a 4-1 victory against Ottawa. A victory that, when you look at the scoreline, looks more lopsided than it really was. The way the game started, Ottawa was dictating play. And if it wasn't for the stellar play of Connor Hellebuck and the relatively poor play of his counterpart Linus Ullmark, well, this streak might have come to an end. Mason Appleton, who scored the eventual winner, gave his frank assessment of the game.
That was probably the ugliest one, I think. But at the end of the day, when you put together a streak like this, not every win is going to look the same. That'd be almost impossible. So I think it's testament to the type of team we are and how deep we are and find different ways to win. Not everyone's going to be a Picasso, and tonight we felt like we gave up a little too much, but still found a way to get the win, and that's what matters.
Yeah, Appleton pleased with how the game ended, where Winnipeg held Ottawa to just 2 shots in the final period. So hopefully the winning ways continue tonight. Marcy, the Jets back at it against Nashville with puck drop at 7 o'clock. But after that victory last night, they are 3 points atop the NHL standings ahead of the Washington Capitals.
I like that stat. Let's stay with hockey. Seems that politics in the sport are more interwoven than ever these days.
Yeah, we saw that with Donald Trump's backing of the U.S. team that lost to Canada in that emotional final at the Four Nations face-off. Wayne Gretzky, Marcy, caught a lot of online flack during that game where he served as Canada's honorary captain. Gretzky is a friend of the U.S. president's, a close enough friend that he attended Trump's presidential inauguration. Given the U.S. leader's comments about Canada becoming a 51st state, many on social media have questioned where Gretzky stands on that matter. Well, Trump tried to offer a little clarity on the issue yesterday, writing on his Truth Social platform, quote unquote, Wayne supports Canada the way it is, as he should, even though it's not nearly as good as it could be as part of the greatest and most powerful country in the world. So there you go. Although I'm sure, Marcy, many a Canadian would rather have heard from the great one himself on this particular matter.
Let's finish with soccer, where the growing tensions between the United States and Canada are also at play there.
Yeah, maybe more at play than they are in hockey. The footy rivals are getting set to play in next month's Nations League Cup finals in Los Angeles and could very well meet for that title, which is a tantalizing prospect when you consider comments made by Canada's coach Jesse Marsh yesterday. A Wisconsin native, Marsh made his views on Trump's 51st state comments pretty clear.
For me right now, I couldn't be prouder to be the Canadian national team coach, and I found a place that embodies the ideals and morals of what not just football and a team is, but what life is. And that's integrity, respect, and the belief that good people can do great things together. If I have one message to our president, it's lay off the ridiculous rhetoric about Canada being the 51st state. As an American, I'm ashamed of the arrogance and disregard that we've shown one of our historically oldest, strongest, and most loyal allies.
How about that? I don't recall Canada's hockey coach, John Cooper, being quite so frank ahead of the Four Nations face-off final. Just imagine, Marcy, then, the emotion we'll see should Canada and the U.S. advance to the Nations League title game. And remember, this country's soccer team, unlike Canada's national hockey squad, is made up almost entirely of first and second generation Canadians and has a captain in Alphonso Davies who grew up in a refugee camp.
All right. Thanks a lot for your report, Scott. Appreciate it.
You betcha.
It is Morning Sports with Scott Regehr. We're coming up to 7:30 news. I'm Marcy Marcusa. It is bound to be a little bit slick underfoot out there, and not just underfoot, but you could hit some black ice if you're driving this well. We're right at those temperatures. We've also got that system of snow moving into central Manitoba, so in Flin Flon, 10 to 15 centimeters expected. If you're having any problems on the morning commute because of all of this, you can give us a call at 788-3093. 788-3093 is where you can reach us on the commuter line. Well, still ahead, Premier Wab Canoe will be live in studio this morning with us. And to tee up that conversation, Heather Wells is first with our CBC Winnipeg News. And you'll hear more about today's top story about the Prairie Green Landfill. That's next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 7:30, it is -7. It's going to be mostly cloudy Thursday in Winnipeg. It's going to get windy as well, with a high of 1 and then periods of light snow this afternoon. Police are working to identify possible remains found at a landfill north of Winnipeg. This comes after nearly 3 months of an ongoing search for Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron, 2 of the 4 women murdered by serial killer Jeremy Skibitsky in 2022. The province says it could take up to a couple of weeks to identify the remains. Hilda Anderson-Pierce is part of the National Family and Survivors Circle, a group that includes family members of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. She hopes this discovery at Prairie Green Landfill will bring more awareness.
It should be a wake-up call to community, know that Indigenous women's bodies are being disposed of in landfills. This should, wake up the nation, to respond and to respond adequately.
Anderson-Pierce says the discovery gives the families a chance at closure. And as forensic work is underway, Premier Rob Canoe says there is still a lot of uncertainty.
I hope there is closure coming for one family because of the news of today, but we know that we have to keep working for the other family, and potentially, again, with that uncertainty, we may have to continue the work here.
And the search at Prairie Green Landfill will continue today. You can hear more from Premier Canoe coming up in the next half hour right here on Information Radio. Manitoba Hydro wants to spend almost $1.4 billion on a new fuel-burning generating station. As CBC's Bartley Kivas reports, it might run on something the NDP government has promised to phase out as a source of electricity.
Manitoba Hydro has a plan to build a pair of fuel-burning turbines to generate 500 megawatts of electricity on demand. Spokesperson Peter Chura says the extra power is needed to prevent the province from running short of electricity in the dead of winter.
Our winter peak load capacities are getting higher and higher, and we've already estimated that we're probably going to need more capacity in order to meet those winter peak loads by 2029-2030.
Hydro wants to get going on the plant soon. It hasn't decided on a fuel. Natural gas is on the table, even though the NDP government has promised to wean hydro off fossil fuels by 2035. Adrian Sala is the minister responsible for hydro.
This is focused right now on ensuring that we meet our energy needs here in Manitoba, that we keep energy as affordable as possible.
Other potential fuel sources include hydrogen and renewable natural gas, which comes from the likes of compost or sewage. Both of those options may come with higher costs than natural gas. Bartley Kivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
This week's sudden warm snap in Winnipeg has left rough patches of ice and slush on a lot of sidewalks. The city says it doesn't remove ice from sidewalks. Instead, it usually treats them with sand to improve walking conditions. But those conditions pose a challenge for people with mobility issues. Melissa Graham is with the Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities.
What we're seeing right now with the weather we have, even though it's nice and lovely and warm, is that thick layer of slush that gets created because we don't plow down to pavement.
Graham says the Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities has started the Snow Plow campaign. They send photos of unplowed sidewalks to the city of Winnipeg to let them know about gaps in coverage. A pedestrian scramble could soon be coming to Winnipeg's Exchange District. The city's Public Works Committee votes next week on a pilot project to test one of the pedestrian scrambles at the corner of King and Bannatyne. The scramble would allow pedestrians to cross simultaneously in all 4 directions. Advocates say it improves safety and reduces delays, but some designs allow people to cross diagonally. Public Works Chair Janice Luke says that option would require modifications to the intersection.
What it's proposing is a low-budget approach to it, in that the scramble would be going to the intersections. It wouldn't be diagonal.
If approved, the pilot project would begin this year, with a report expected in spring of 2026. Voters in Ontario head to the polls today for a provincial election. Progressive Conservative leader Doug Ford is trying to win a third majority government. He's facing Ontario Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie and NDP leader Merritt Stiles. You can hear more national and international news coming up on World Report at 8. Well, 11 in a row.
Puck still loose. Scores! Appleton banks it home after Omar thought he had it, but it was
Mason Appleton in the first period on Sportsnet as the Winnipeg Jets increased their consecutive wins to 11, beating the Senators 4-1. After the game, Appleton was first to say it wasn't a pretty win, and he says, just ask the coach.
That was probably the ugliest one, I think. I think he would say that too. But at the end of the day, when you put together a streak like this, not every win is going to look the same. That'd be almost impossible. So I think it's a testament to the type of team we are and how deep we are and find different ways to win. Not everyone's going to be a Picasso.
The Jets stay on the road for another game tonight in Nashville. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
All right. Thank you, Heather Wells.
You're welcome.
Heather Wells live in our news center this morning. It is 7:35 a.m. On the Commute, 788-3093 if you need us. We're watching a weather system through Flin Flon, and in Winnipeg right now, -6. Well, let's return to today's top story. As you've been hearing in the news and as you've been hearing on national news all across this country, a lot of reaction to what our Premier has called an important day yesterday. The province says that possible human remains have been found at the Prairie Green landfill. That announcement came yesterday. Since December, teams have been searching the landfill for the remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron. They are two of the victims of serial killer Jeremy Skibitsky. Now, Premier Rob Canoe was with the families yesterday after the discovery. He is in studio live now with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So those words, an important day, are not my language, they're yours.
Mm-hmm.
Can you put this in context for us?
Well, I hope this is healing. And when I say healing, I mean, first and foremost, healing for the families who've been through a very difficult period of losing their loved ones and then having the issue play out so publicly and become very divisive at some points. Then to have to go through the trial and hear all the details, and then to go through the search, which itself has been very emotional for these family members, these loved ones. So, we're all the loved ones to the people that we know, and I hope Manitobans remember that we're talking about two families who are looking for their loved ones. But at the same time, when I say healing, I also hope it's healing for the province, too, to move forward. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We have to wait for this identification process to play out. But if this is, in fact, one of the women that we're searching for, if we're bringing closure to a family in Manitoba here, then I hope the fact that we have had tense moments on this topic over the past few years, where there have been moments where it's been difficult between neighbors in our province, then I hope that this helps to bring healing and closure on that level too, and that we can move forward as one province.
Can I ask you some specifics of yesterday, and so much as is appropriate to share? Yeah. What was it like being with the families after the discovery, and were you able to do anything spiritual if that was their intention on site?
Yeah, it was very meaningful and very, very powerful. At the same time, I think everybody would understand how people are still processing and still, starting to wrap their heads around what this news yesterday means for them as family members, what it means for the people who've been working on this project. Like, I do also want to really commend and highlight the work of the search technicians, the forensic anthropologists, the people who designed this process, because it's a testament that we were able to make this, identification of potential human remains yesterday, that they designed a really good process. So I think many of us felt like this was the right thing to do, but now we also see that it was a realistic project for us to embark on. But the families, I think, are very articulate, very well spoken. I wouldn't presume to speak on their behalf, but when we look at the whole, scope of this thing going back to 2022, their courage and their resilience is just very, very outstanding to me.
Was the overriding, early conversations and early gatherings with the families and with the searchers, was there, obviously we still have a lot of information that has to be done. You have to confirm these are human remains, and there's a long way to go, but I'm wondering if there was was it joy? Was it cautious optimism? What was there relief or tears? What was the overriding emotion going through the searchers and through the families and even through yourself yesterday?
If I was to try and sum everybody up, I would probably say determination. I heard directly from some of the search technicians who made the actual identification of the first area and the follow-up team, they said they were motivated. They were motivated to get back into the search facility and to continue this work because they've now seen some very direct evidence of how they can potentially bring closure for these families and for our province and country too. And again, I'm very respectful of the families, but I know that they are resolute in wanting to bring their loved ones home. And then, of course, people on the government side, such as myself and the civil servants who have designed this and the other members of our team, there was a lot of recommitment to trying to ensure that we do every single step here in the most meticulous fashion so that we can give confidence to the families that if we are moving forward on their healing journey, that it will be in a good way, but also to the public who've been rightfully paying so much attention to this issue, that everyone knows that we're doing things in the right way every step of the way.
You have said there wasn't a specific item that led to yesterday's discovery, that multiple objects have been found in the landfill that have helped narrow the search. So what's the next step in the process now that possible remains have been found? Just to reiterate some of what we understand will happen next and maybe a possible timeline for identification?
Well, on identification, we're looking at up to 2 weeks, and that's because it's a joint process with the chief medical examiner and the RCMP, and there are obviously some technical things that need to be worked through and their whole process, again, just to be meticulous and to get it right and to provide confidence. So we're going to have a certain amount of patience with that. And I think most of the folks I spoke to yesterday do have that understanding that there is a process here, though, I mean, best case scenario, it will move ahead much quicker than that so that we can potentially move on to the next step. And then with the search itself, that will continue. That will continue as of today. Yesterday, folks should understand that once we went through the protocol, which was very thorough and it involved researching some of those areas where these potential human remains were found, the search was paused for the day. And that was to make sure that the families had time to get to the site and to go through their process, and we joined them for a good part of that process as well too, and it was very meaningful and emotionally impactful, but also because the RCMP needed time for their process and then to do their transportation and hand off to the chief medical examiner. So the search technicians, the people actually doing the search, many of whom are university students studying to become forensic anthropologists, they were all on standby yesterday. Again, pretty intense day for them. They're all highly motivated, very, very good-natured young people. And today, the search will continue, though this one area where we have found these partial human remains, we believe, that material will be treated separately from the rest.
Does this bring more resources to Manitoba?
Well, we believe that this thing has been properly resourced from the outset and that we're proceeding in a fiscally responsible way, but also a morally responsible way. So this has been a joint resource project with the federal government. That will continue. And then we have the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs involved too as one of our partners. And so Grand Chief Kyra Wilson was on site yesterday also.
Just last, you started by saying that you also want this to be a moment where people consider, healing what divisiveness has happened in our province. What does that look like? What does that look like around our dinner tables, hockey rinks, workplaces, in our regular lives, Manitoban to Manitoban, in your view?
Well, there's going to be more clarity once this identification process moves forward in the next few weeks. But whichever way that identification process turns out, if it is for one of these families, if it is for another family that perhaps is not part of the conversation right now, I do hope that Manitobans just recognize this is a value statement about who we are. This is about us as Manitobans saying who we want to be as a province. And in my mind, we're a province where if somebody goes missing, we go looking. And even if it's difficult and even if there are long odds, we work hard. We have that blue-collar work ethic and humble attitude that is the nature of Manitobans. And we do our best to try and help our fellow neighbors. And there's a group of young women here who have lost their loved ones. And I hope we're also sending a message as a society that our society includes you. in a very real way, and that they should feel empowered to participate fully and reach their full potential, just like every other Manitoban, because every child matters and every person in our society matters.
We're about to talk to a family and a longtime MMIWG advocate now next on Information Radio. Premier Wabkanu, thank you for being here live this morning.
Thanks so much.
That is Premier Wabkanu live in studio with us at 7:45. Canberra Harris asked for privacy yesterday on social media, so obviously we are giving privacy to the families. In a few moments, though, we will have our next interview here coming up. I just want to mention 7:45, you're on CBC 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app and on YouTube. Well, my next guest is Hilda Anderson-Pierce. She's the chair for National Family and Survivors Circle from MMIWG, a longtime advocate and family member herself, who's been on our radio airwaves for many, many years in reaction to different stories about missing and murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirit girls and youth. Good morning to you, Hilda.
Good morning.
What are your feelings this morning, and what were you thinking as you were listening to the Premier speak about this?
Well, first and foremost, my thoughts and my prayers are always with the families who've been impacted, by the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people, and I'm holding them in my prayers, and sending them love, because I know, with the announcement of the discovery of remains is, brings a lot of trauma and anxiety to those families who have loved ones who are missing. So we have to, ensure that they're surrounded by community and supports and resources during this very difficult time as well. And, to the families, they're looking to bring their loved ones home, to honor them in ceremony and give them a proper burial as well. So
I just continue to remind people that, we're using the language potential human remains. So there's still some waiting involved here. What's that going to be like right now? When we're in this moment where we're waiting, as the Premier said, it could be as early as 2 weeks where we find out, what was in fact determined to be found yesterday. You talked about resources that the family might need around them as this wait continues. What kind of resources?
Trauma supports, cultural supports to provide them with, traditional medicine, ceremony to help ground them as they're waiting, because that's a lot of trauma to endure. Even the announcement of potential human remains, is very hard to hear when you have a loved one who is missing, and you're always hopeful that, that your loved one is found safe. But in the instance where, their remains are found, it's very difficult to navigate, the grief and the trauma and everything surrounding that as well. So, there's community supports that are really needed right now for the families who have loved ones who are missing, and to help them navigate and process different feelings and emotions.
The Premier talked about, the divisiveness that has existed in this province. And obviously, part of that was fed by the previous government running on a promise not to search the landfill, putting this actually out as an election issue. What does today mean, yesterday's discovery mean in light of that? And what is your hope for moving through divisiveness?
Well, I think for me as an Indigenous woman, who is a mother, grandmother, I'm really hopeful that, each and every citizen in this province of Manitoba and across the country, steps forward and recognizes, how sacred Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people are, and that we have the right to live, we have the right to be safe. And it's really critical that our basic human rights are upheld in this country, and there's a real focus on prevention, healing, and wellness, that we shouldn't be looked at that in a way that we can be disposed of, and that an individual can campaign on the bodies of Indigenous women. That clearly indicates there is, a moral and ethical issue in the province that needs to be addressed as well, and, addressing systemic and structural racism as well.
Are we making any positive gains on that front from your view at the grassroots level? I'm just curious if you've seen any improvement in how people are with each other, Manitoban to Manitoban, since the election now. 2 years ago?
I think there is some improvement, but is it enough? Absolutely not. We're still going missing, experiencing violence, and dying at alarming rates. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there has been investments and there has been movements. But is it happening fast enough? Absolutely not. We need to ensure that we're looking at, the crisis from a prevention lens and ensuring that those supports and resources are readily available and available 24/7, especially when we're looking at our vulnerable little sisters and women and two-spirit and gender diverse individuals.
When you personally heard, this news, what was your personal reaction, given obviously that you are, your loved one, your sister was lost. Dawn had died and was found back in 2011. But obviously you would always carry that kind of grief and understand this on such a personal level, what this is like.
I think for me, I, felt a lot of empathy, for the families and love for the families, who have loved ones who are missing and who are waiting for their loved ones to come home. I just automatically had each and every one, in my thoughts and my prayers when I heard the news, and just, the feeling, that they're grieving, that they're looking for some form of peace. They're looking to bring their loved ones home in ceremony. Those were my thoughts yesterday when I heard the news.
Hilda, thank you very much for not only your time this morning, but over the many years you've given us your time in these moments where we, I think as a province, need to come together and make sense of something, as the Premier said, as important as this moment. And we really appreciate you being with us today.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
That is Hilda Anderson-Pierce. She's the chair for the National Family and Survivors Circle. And so we obviously just heard from the Premier live on CBC as well, as we're all absorbing the news that potential human remains have been found at the Prairie Green Landfill. There's more online to the story, and also more about the lives and the loved ones of the families involved and the searchers involved as well. You can read more at cbc.ca/Manitoba. Right now it is 7 minutes to 8 o'clock. And we thought we'd play a song this morning inspired by the struggle that families of missing and murdered Indigenous women go through. This was actually written in 2015. From Saugeen First Nation, this is Ali Fontaine with Home.
We need some kind of closure. Days go by. Are we getting any closer? 'Cause it's been far too long, ever since you've been gone. It's been weeks since we've spoken, questions left unanswered, hearts been broken, and I'll try to keep my head up, even though it's not enough. This emptiness is killing me. I wanna know, what can you be? I'm sitting here all alone, just wondering, will you come back home? I wish I could hear your laughter. So much for happy ever after, and I'll try to carry on, even though it feels just wondering, will you come back home? I'm wondering, will you come back home? I'm wondering, will you come back home?
Sally Fontaine from Saugeen First Nation, tunes called Home. It is now 4 minutes to 8 o'clock on CBC. I'm Marcy Marcusa with our team here at Information Radio. Kevin Ipatebo, Corey Funk, and Abby Adiemi behind the glass. In Winnipeg, we do have a small update here on traffic. Lashmody and Springfield, there's been an earlier issue that's cleared now. Lights are operating again at Lash and Springfield. There's crews still on scene making some repairs. So the northbound median lane is still blocked while they make repairs. So it's partially fixed. Use caution, though, if you're traveling through. We understand right now there's no delays. Could be a little bit slippery out there, though, and that includes with possible black ice popping up. And if you're walking, certainly a little slick. So 788-3093, in case you see anything more serious we should pass along in the commute. We'll get into your weather forecast details in a moment. Right now, let's go to Heather Wells for our news headlines.
Good morning. Well, Manitoba Hydro wants to spend nearly $1.4 billion on a new 500 megawatt generating station. It would make power by burning fuel. What sort of fuel hasn't been decided, but natural gas is on the table. This week's sudden warm snap in Winnipeg has left rough patches of ice and slush on a lot of sidewalks. The city says it doesn't remove ice from sidewalks. Instead, it usually treats them with sand to improve walking conditions. But those conditions pose a challenge to people with mobility issues. We're going to hear from the Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities coming up in our next local news at 8:30.
All right, thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
-6 in Winnipeg right now, a high of 1 degree above. It's going to be windy this afternoon with periods of light snow for us in the city here. Central Manitoba, Flin Flon, Cranberry, Portage, Grass River Provincial Park, 10 to 15 centimeters of snow expected. Really going to develop later this morning. This is a low pressure system coming from northern Alberta. Well, still ahead after 8 o'clock on the program, the news that Ukraine and the U.S. may have reached an agreement for a deal that would include access to Ukraine's rare earth and critical minerals is shining a spotlight on these resources. We're going to look more at what that deal actually means and what resources are in question here. So stay tuned. That's after 8. Also after 8 on the program, a First Nations man says he was denied health care for appendicitis because the doctor assumed he was hungover. We're going to hear why Dr. Barry Lavallee here in Manitoba says this case is more evidence that anti-racism education does not work. He's our interview after 8. Stay with us. World Report's next. It's 1 minute to on CBC 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or YouTube.
Today on Q with Tom Power.
Jay Douglas is one of the most important names in Canadian music history, but you probably haven't heard of him. He spent years shaping reggae, soul, and R&B in Canada, and now a new documentary finally tells his story. Jay will be here to tell you about his journey from selling out clubs to being almost forgotten.
I'm going to take you on a journey back to the beginning.
That's coming up on Q, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
The CBC News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current with Matt Galloway.
Hundreds of thousands of Canadians spend their winters in Florida, but anger against Donald Trump's threats is leading some to say they have had enough. Some Canadians there don't get that, though. They say they love the freedom in Florida. It's coming up on The Current.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. The families of 2 First Nations women murdered by a serial killer are still waiting for closure, but there has been a breakthrough in the search for remains north of Winnipeg at the Prairie Green Landfill.
We have found what we believe to be somebody's loved one today.
Manitoba Premier Rob Canoe says it could take weeks to get more answers, but investigators have found what could be human remains. Now forensic experts are trying to make an identification. For more, I'm joined by my World Report co-host, John Northcott. And John, what is the latest on this investigation?
The latest, Marcia, is that search teams will be back on the scene today, likely with a new sense of purpose. The search of the Prairie Green landfill is believed to be the resting place of Mercedes Myron, 26, and Morgan Harris, 39, murdered, and their bodies left in a dumpster and then carried, police believe, to the landfill. The search task has been enormous, taking months already, covering an area the size of 4 football fields, involving search technicians and now, with the discovery of the remains, forensic anthropologists, Manitoba RCMP, and the coroner's office, as the process of trying to make an identification is now underway. Manitoba Premier Wabkanu.
The team there is very resolute, and the fact that they've consistently done this very tough, literally backbreaking work because you're hunched over for hours a day just speaks to the effort and the heart of people working on this project.
The decision to search the Prairie Green landfill was a controversial one. Remind us of what happened.
Marcia, the search itself, whether it was feasible, safe, or justified, was, you'll recall, an issue in the fall 2023 Manitoba provincial election when the then ruling Progressive Conservatives took out billboards to argue that the landfill search should not happen. Canoe and his NDP argued that they would launch a search if elected, and they were. Reacting to the announcement that investigators have what they believe are in fact human remains, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kyra Wilson said, quote, "The discovery reinforces our commitment of ensuring that no family is left without answers and that justice is served for our stolen sisters."
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Marcia.
John Northcott with me in studio. People in Ontario go to the polls today in the province's first winter election in more than 40 years.
Well, I just want to win. I don't look at the numbers. I just want to win. I want to win a majority.
Progressive Conservative leader Doug Ford called the election early. He says he needs a mandate that will outlast the U.S. president. NDP leader Marit Stiles has been campaigning on health care and affordability.
It is time you had a government that truly respected you the way you deserve to be respected and treated.
Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie is promising to connect every Ontarian to a family doctor.
We will get it done for the people across Ontario.
And Green Party leader Mike Schreiner is promising to build more houses while protecting farmland.
People are struggling to get by, and Ontario Greens are listening.
Polls are open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Inuit families are about to get a formal apology from the federal government. Inuit have been waiting decades. A government-directed relocation program moved their ancestors from their home communities. Juanita Taylor is in Arctic Bay, Nunavut, to see it happen.
Laisha Kavavauk and his wife Tagunak look closely at 80-year-old photos of Inuit around the time when Laisha's father was put on a ship from Kingate, formerly Cape Dorset, and dropped off at Dundas Harbour, 1,200 kilometers away. The Hudson's Bay Company, with the federal government's approval, recruited Laisha's father and 52 other Inuit from Kingate, Pangnaktok, and Pond Inlet in 1932. They were sent to Dundas Harbour to hunt, trap, and trade. They were promised to come home in 2 years. But that didn't happen. When the post closed, several Inuit were relocated to Arctic Bay, Fort Ross, and Teloriak, where other trading posts were established. Survivors say they suffered lasting impacts of loss from their land, animals, and families. That's why the Dundas Harbour Relocation Society has been fighting to get this apology. Laisha's daughter, Lucy Kavavauk, is with the society.
So the importance is really the federal government acknowledging that there were wrongdoings and that the whole reason was for Canadian sovereignty.
The Federal Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations will be delivering the apology this afternoon, including announcing a compensation package for more than 200 descendants of the Dundas Harbour relocation. Juanita Taylor, CBC News, Arctic Bay, Nunavut.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer visits the White House later today. He is the second European leader to meet Donald Trump this week. He'll be trying to convince Trump that peace in Ukraine will only last if Kyiv and European leaders are at the negotiating table. Krista Gomansing has more from London.
There is no more important relationship.
A charm offensive is clearly part of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's plan as he heads to the White House later today. There's more than $1 trillion in investments between the two countries on the line. And the UK, for now, appears to be dodging tariff threats being hurled at allies by U.S. President Donald Trump. On his first official visit, he must also defend Ukraine and try to coax the president to stay united with Western allies against Russian aggression.
We have said to our European brothers and sisters that they need to take care of this.
Retired four-star General Philip Breedlove was the commander of U.S. European Command when Russia invaded Crimea back in 2014. Under the Trump administration, support for Ukraine is waning, while blame for the war is no longer being attributed to Russia. Breedlove says the U.S. can and should play a role moving forward should there be a peace deal.
First, supplying all of that great intelligence that we have given Ukraine in the past, and we need to give them into the future. And we have air power that could be that backstop.
That backstop was talked about by French President Emmanuel Macron on Monday. Now Starmer is there to reinforce the message.
We share fundamental values of openness, of democracy, freedom of speech, and freedom to pursue the future.
Crystal Gamansing, CBC News, London.
The Trump administration's deportation of migrants has turned Panama into a key location. Not only does it serve as a stopover in a series of U.S. deportation flights to Central America, but it's also housing close to 300 deportees. Melissa Kent reports from Panama City.
Men, women, and children are loaded onto two buses outside the Decapolis Hotel in the heart of Panama City. It's not clear where they're being taken. Earlier this week, clothes were hanging in several of the hotel's windows. Some people stood for hours looking out, some with signs asking for help. These are the last of the nearly 300 migrants from Asia, the Middle East, and Africa deported by the U.S. on military planes to Panama and locked inside this hotel for almost 2 weeks, surrounded by tight security with limited contact to the outside world. Panama says they're here as part of an agreement with the U.S. We haven't said they are deprived of their liberty, says Frank Abrego, Panama's public security minister. They are in our custody for their protection. He also says they're free to return to their country of origin. Outside the hotel, the honorary consul of Sri Lanka says he's trying to get emergency travel documents for 4 nationals. He says they lost their passports in an unfortunate adventure, as he put it. But those unwilling or unable to go back to their country of origin, nearly 100 migrants, have been sent to a remote facility in the Darien Jungle region along Panama's border with Colombia. They'll be held there until another country is willing to take them in. Melissa Kent for CBC News, Panama City.
Academy Award-winning actor Jean Hackman has died.
All right, Popeye's here. Get your hands on your heads. Get off the bar and get on the wall. Come on, move.
That's Hackman in the 1971 film The French Connection. His role as Detective Popeye Doyle earned him his first of 2 Oscars and launched a career that made Hackman one of the most respected actors of his generation. Police in New Mexico say Hackman and his wife were found dead yesterday in their home in Santa Fe. No cause of death has been established, but police have ruled out foul play. Jean Hackman was 95 years old. And that is the latest national and international news from World Report News Anytime. CBCNews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Well, good Thursday morning, everyone. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio. We're live in downtown Winnipeg on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on that app, on YouTube. Thanks for joining us. -6 in the city. And we appreciate you being along with us. This half hour on the program, we are going to hear from Dr. Barry LaValle. He is, well, I shouldn't put words in his mouth. We're going to let you hear what he had to say. He says he's giving up. on anti-racism education for healthcare professionals. This comes after an Indigenous man was told his appendicitis was a hangover and he was denied care. So we're going to hear more from Dr. LaValle about how he's feeling this morning and about recent comments he made about a rally to support the man in this case and what happened to him. So stay tuned. That is coming up by this half hour on the program. Also, this half hour on the show, we're going to have a look at what is happening with the news that Ukraine and the U.S. may have reached an agreement for a deal that would include access to Ukraine's rare earth and critical minerals. To other news now, Heather Wells is in with our top headlines today. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, it is being described as a painful but significant moment. After nearly 3 months of searching the Prairie Green landfill for 2 First Nations women, possible human remains have been found. The Chief Medical Examiner's Office and RCMP are working to identify those remains. It's believed Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron are in the Prairie Green landfill, 2 of 4 women murdered by serial killer Jeremy Skibitsky in 2022. Well, are you ready to scramble? The city of Winnipeg wants to test out a new way for pedestrians to cross the street. It's proposing a pilot project for a pedestrian scramble at King and Bannatyne in the Exchange. It will allow pedestrians to cross all 4 directions all at once. Other cities like Toronto already use scrambles, which advocates say improves safety and reduces delays. I'll be back with more Manitoba News at 8:30.
All right. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Well, let's get into this weather forecast in a bit more detail and update those temperatures with Abby Adiyami.
The sun is out over the city. A cloudy day ahead with light snow arriving sometime this afternoon. Some rain and snow overnight. Right now, Winnipeg, we are at -8, warming up to +2, and we still have that snowfall warning for central Manitoba. We'll be expecting about 10 to 15 centimeters.
All right. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
And Corey Funk has been watching the commute.
Yes, very quiet commute overall this morning. No major issues. There were some lights out at Lagimodiere and Springfield. They're back on, but there are crews working in the northbound median lane on Lagimodiere. So just keep right to get around that. Not too many delays. Other than that, though, if you see something going on, give me a call on the CBC Commute line if you're walking, biking, driving. Let me know. 204-788-3093.
Well, as I mentioned, Dr. Barry LaValle is an accomplished doctor and an advocate in our community. He is the Chief Executive Officer as well of Kiiwetinook Inanu Minanyawen, Inc., which works to improve healthcare for First Nations people in northern Manitoba. Now, earlier this week, Dr. LaValle spoke at a rally in support of a First Nations man who was told his appendicitis was a hangover and he was denied care. Here is some of what Dr. LaValle said at the rally.
I don't know how the hell that happened, other than the new word we're going to use, guys, is hatred against First Nations people. Hatred of First Nations people. No longer are we going to play nice in terms of treating you at the med school and nursing schools about cultural competency. That's all garbage. This is based on hatred that is endured and propagated by the federal systems, the provincial systems, the healthcare systems, and the bureaucrats who sit right behind me.
That was Dr. LaValle speaking at that rally on Tuesday. Now, he joins us via Zoom to talk more about the ongoing issue of anti-Indigenous racism in our healthcare system. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell me what was going through your mind and what you were feeling as you were making those comments.
Yeah, thanks, Marcy, and thanks for inviting me onto the show. I am the CEO of Kiiwetinook Inanu Minanyawen. I'm a family physician by training, and I'm an academic in terms of analyzing racism and how it's actually fostered within the healthcare system specific to First Nations people. I was feeling frustrated after all the work, about 30 years of work that I've been doing in various parts of the world, as well as various teams, to try and attack and eliminate First Nations specific racism within the healthcare system. And so, in my job around health transformation for First Nations people located in northern Manitoba, I have to take deeper dives into the systems, including the bureaucracies and look for ways to make changes fundamentally that actually drive and improve healthcare for First Nations. And so what you heard was my frustration, as well as I'm a recognized medical educator. I have a master's degree in adult learning theory, and I use that across Canada, as well as previously at the University of Manitoba, and took on the task of trying to locate, understand, and eliminate racism as we teach new doctors. And so what you saw was a culmination of that. In the beginning, we said cultural safety and all that kind of stuff, but it has nothing to do with culture of First Nations people. First Nations people are just human beings, right? But they're not treated as human beings. But so we came up with the word and adopted the word racism, which was, I think, generally born kind of in the United States with a Black experience, etc. And so that's really what goes on, is that we're trying to foster good care, respectful care for First Nations, but it's not working.
So let me get right to the heart of this then. Yep. If education doesn't work, and if it's time to speak more plainly about what is happening here, and if we do have hatred at the root of this, and education's not combating against that, it's not about awareness, it's just hatred for hatred's sake, or racism for...
Totally.
Where do we go from here to improve things for people who are trying to access healthcare? Indigenous people within our system.
Yeah. And I just want to make one comment about that so that people understand. If you are a First Nations person and you look like a First Nations person, whatever that might be, by the system, or if you have a card that identifies your treaty status of your treaty, you are at risk going into any healthcare system within Manitoba. There's a risk that you will not be treated correctly, you will not be listened to, you will not be offered the diagnostics, nor will you be offered treatment or follow-up. That's not all cases. Let me make that clear. But there is a risk for anybody who's First Nations in Manitoba to go to any healthcare system in Manitoba. I'm talking about the hospitals, the secondary and tertiary hospitals. That is a fact. Some of the solutions that we're working on for northern communities, 23 sovereign communities that we work with, is we're looking to take over the healthcare system. We're looking to be drivers of the healthcare system. We want the resources because we can do better, okay? There's no doubt about that. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't hire white and all other doctors.
But it's First Nations-led care by First Nations-led healthcare professionals to First Nations Manitobans.
Yeah, and that would include non-Indigenous people. There's no doubt about that. Not everybody acts on the hatred that they might feel towards First Nations people, but we need our own system that could run parallel, can actually help change systems and improve even care for white people in this province.
As you move toward bigger goals that you're talking about, obviously, how in the meantime do you, what would you say to people listening about how they advocate within the system that we have?
Well, I tell everybody, I'm talking to non-Indigenous people as well, know your rights when you go see a provider. Know your rights and demand your rights, but be very careful. One of the common features for First Nations people when they actually advocate, they're termed angry, and they're generally a security guard will be called and they'll be kicked out. That is a common feature. So be careful for non-Indigenous people as well. Sometimes when you advocate, the system is not prepared to listen to your concerns and to take your concerns seriously. Sometimes you could be thrown out. And we have to develop systems. And the minister knows this, the Minister of Health knows this. We have to develop systems that are responsive immediately to the concerns of a patient, all patients. And I don't think we do that very well here at all. Not yet.
I know that you spoke to our producer about something called hopeforwellness.ca. You've been doing some work with Kiwait Nuka Inanu Minuyawan Inc. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Say the question again. Sorry, Mark.
The hopeforwellness.ca is something you've been working on. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that work is?
Hope for Wellness.
Yes. I apologize. My producer gave me this as a prompt question, but perhaps something's gone astray here. Why don't I just ask you?
Yeah, no. That's okay. Just,
so why don't I
cut
just
me off.
ask you straight ahead? What are you working on? Any projects right now that you find have been helpful in the system in terms of either helping First Nations patients advocate for themselves, or if they face discrimination to push back?
Sure, absolutely.
What kind of projects are you working on?
Yeah, so we're working with the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba to examine racism in practice and examine how we actually support physicians for change in their behaviors towards First Nations people. That's one thing. But also we work with the regional health authorities, particularly the Northern Regional Health Authority, and we look at crafting clinical encounters that actually meet the standards and needs of practice for everybody, including and specifically for First Nations people. We also work a lot in devising what's called surge teams in response to, for example, the epidemic of syphilis in communities and HIV. We've crafted teams that differ from the province and the feds in terms of looking at using new technologies and providing care. So we're doing a number of things like that, and including looking at a van that we have in northern Manitoba in Thompson that is staffed by nurses and other people who actually support and help people who are forced to live on the streets in Thompson. It's a new piece of healthcare that we're doing, and we do that in concert with all other provider systems in Thompson. And it's quite successful to date to provide that type of care that generally was not provided in a robust or a racism-free environment for people in living in northern Manitoba.
Appreciate having you with us, Dr. LaValle. Much to talk about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You as well. That's Dr. Barry LaValle. He's Chief Executive Officer for Kiiwetinoong I'm going to do this correctly. Kiiwetinoong Inanu Minuyawen, Inc.
The United States has been ripped.
Then I thank him for joining us this morning. 8:22 is the time right now on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app and on YouTube. Well, we're moving on to a different story right now, quite briskly, because I want to get it in before the news. It's a conversation we had very early this morning, and we're turning our attention to national and international news now. Political and economic tensions between Ukraine and the U.S. have been in the news. Of course, the leaders of the two countries are expected to sign a deal this week. It would give the U.S. access to Ukraine's mineral resources. So that agreement involves critical and rare earth minerals. It's being cast by President Donald Trump, the agreement, as a way of repaying, he says, the billions of dollars in aid to Kiev during the Ukraine-Russia war. Now, it's also turning attention to the global race around securing access to those resources. And this morning, we were joined by Warren Mabey to walk us through it. He is director of Queen's University Institute for Energy and Environmental Policy.
Good morning.
So what can you tell us about the extent of Ukraine's rare earth mineral deposits to begin with?
So we do know that Ukraine has more of these rare earths, more of these elements than a lot of places on the planet. By one estimate, about 5% of the kind of proven reserves, the proven deposits of rare earths are found within the borders of Ukraine. Ukraine is only about 0.2% of the world's landmass, so that means that there's a higher concentration there than we might see in other places. And that gets really exciting for mining companies, because the problem with getting access to rare earths and some of the other critical minerals that are out there is that they tend to be found in very low concentrations, which makes it really expensive to get access. If we can find places where the concentrations are higher, it becomes more viable and more likely that we'll be able to bring them to markets.
So obviously developing the resources is extremely difficult and very expensive. So in your view, is that part of the thinking then by Ukraine around this potential deal with the United States?
I think so. I think that Ukraine sees some opportunity economically. Now, we don't know the details of the deal yet and what benefits might accrue to Ukraine versus what would accrue to the States. But the big thing for Ukraine has got to be the stability that this sort of deal would bring. We're not going to see development of these resources if there's a conflict waging across the country. So there's going to have to be some kind of stability brought in. Now, what that looks like, we don't know. Washington has been sort of cagey on what that's going to look like. But I think Ukraine is hoping that this will bring some peace and stability into the region.
And you raise a critical point there around who will ultimately benefit, because obviously this was prompted by the U.S. And the way it's being framed by the U.S. president is that this is somehow to compensate for what they've put forward in terms of dollars to help Ukraine with the war effort thus far. When we hear these terms constantly now, rare earth and critical minerals, can you just elaborate a bit on what exactly we're talking about?
Yeah, so rare earths are a group of 17 sort of soft, heavy metals that are used in a whole range of applications, everything from magnets to batteries to fuel cells to lasers. They're really important when it comes to the sort of green revolution that we're, all going through around the world as we electrify things. We need to be able to make motors which require magnets. We need to be able to make batteries and fuel cells and energy systems to be able to actually take advantage of the renewable resources around the world. Rare earths are just one component of this whole suite of what they call critical minerals, which include things like lithium, cobalt, titanium. These are, again, metals and materials that are usually found in very low concentrations. Right now, most of the production of these products are in places like China. And so finding other deposits becomes really important as we want to diversify and build out this infrastructure.
Can you frame for the listeners, what's at stake here? Why there's such a global race right now to secure access to rare earth critical minerals?
Yeah, so right now, I think 75% of rare earth production is actually in China, and a lot of the deposits are being exploited in China. That means that there is a country that has a lot of control over the supply chain. So again, opening up those supply chains, finding other sources becomes important. We need those products, as I say, in order to be able to make the motors, the batteries, the systems that will allow us to decarbonize and move towards a cleaner energy future. They're also really important in the computing side of things. So, the quantum computing revolution, the movement towards AI tools, all of those, again, are supported in part by access to these materials. So it's critical to the future to be able to get as much as we can.
What do we know, Warren, about the potential environmental concerns about how these minerals are mined?
So the big concern is that they're found in such low concentrations. And, that means that in order to get kilograms of product, you need to move tons of ore, or, earth and rock where the metals or the minerals are found. And the more that we need to process, and processing means, using energy, using water, using chemicals to be able to isolate these elements, the more downstream effects we can have. We'll be creating tailings ponds, we'll be creating emissions in terms of, atmospheric emissions or water emissions. These things can be mitigated for sure. We know how to do mining and how to do it as safely as possible, but it does raise concerns because there's so much material that has to be moved in order to get the products.
All right, Warren, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Warren Mabey is the director of Queen's University Institute for Energy and Environmental Policy. I spoke with him earlier this morning. It is coming up to 8:30 news time and getting near the end of our program. I want to give thanks to the people that worked on our program this morning, in particular on the specific items. Associate producer Issa Kixon, who was here late working on the developments around getting the Premier on the air and such. So big thanks to you, Issa. Thanks to our community reporter in unit, Shanley Vidal, as well as associate producer Kalkadan Mulugeta. Associate producers and our live crew here, of course, Corey Funk, Abby Adiabi, and Kevin Ipatebo, who's our YouTube producer. So big thanks to everyone. Also thanks to our news department in advance of our last newscast. So that is Megan Ketcherson and Alana Cole and Heather Wells, who we're about to hear from next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg at 8:30. -7. We're headed to a high today of 1. Expect some light snow this afternoon, and that wind is going to pick up south 30, gusting to 50. And then tonight, we may see some rain as well. Once again, our high today is 1. Premier Rob Canoe says yesterday's discovery of potential human remains at Prairie Green Landfill north of Winnipeg is making families and searchers more determined. Technicians have been sifting through material at the landfill looking for the remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron since December. Canoe says he met with both the searchers and the families yesterday afternoon.
I heard directly from some of the search technicians who made the actual identification of the first area and the follow-up team. They said they were motivated. They were motivated to get back into the search facility and to continue this work because they've now seen some very direct evidence of how they can potentially bring closure for these families.
Canoe says many of those involved in the search are university students studying forensic anthropology. He says all activity at the search site paused after the potential human remains were found. But today they will be back at the landfill continuing their work. The chief medical examiner and RCMP are working to identify the remains. Hilda Anderson-Piers is with the National Family and Survivor Circle. It includes family members of missing or murdered Indigenous women.
This brings them some form of peace to be able to recover their loved ones' remains and to be able to hold them in ceremony and honor their lives and to be able to grieve together collectively as a family and a community.
The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs describes the discovery as a painful but significant moment. In other news, Manitoba Hydro wants to spend nearly $1.4 billion on a new 500-megawatt generating station. It would make power by burning fuel. What sort of fuel has not been decided, but natural gas is on the table. Peter Chura speaks for the Crown Corporation.
No specific investment or resource decisions have been made, and that includes on fuel. There are all kinds of possible technologies.
Other fuel sources include hydrogen and renewable natural gas, which come from compost or sewage treatment. Hydro has presented its cost estimate to the Public Utilities Board for review. The Crown Corporation envisions the construction of 2 fuel-burning turbines by the year 2029. It says it needs more electricity by then to prevent winter power shortages. The warm snap in Winnipeg has caused a quick melt that has left rough patches of ice and slush on many sidewalks. The city says it doesn't remove ice from sidewalks. Instead, it applies sand to improve walking conditions. Melissa Graham at the Manitoba League for Persons with Disabilities says that creates challenges for people with mobility issues. The League has created a snowplow campaign to flag unplowed sidewalks to the city.
Last year, our goal was just to get the attention of the city. This year, we've actually found from the city that the photos and stories we collected were really helpful. So we have a contact at the city we can send them directly to. And they find that really helpful, I think, for training their operators.
Graham would like to see the city update their snow clearing policies to keep up with mid-season thaws. Well, the city of Winnipeg wants to test out a new way to get you across the street. It's proposing a pilot project for a pedestrian scramble at King and Bannatyne in the Exchange. It would allow pedestrians to cross in all 4 directions all at once. Other cities like Toronto already use scrambles, which advocates say improve safety and reduces delays. Janice Lukes chairs the city's Public Works Committee.
The city has not done a pedestrian scramble before, so the city selected this one because this location, King and Bannatyne, because they felt it included pedestrians, cyclists, vehicular traffic.
The committee will vote on the proposal at its meeting next week. If approved, the project would begin this year, with a report expected in spring of 2026. Academy Award-winning actor Jean Hackman has died.
All right, Popeye's here. Get your hands on your heads. Get off the bar and get on the wall. Come on, move.
That's Hackman in the 1971 film The French Connection. His role as Detective Popeye Doyle earned him his first of 2 Oscars and launched a career that made Hackman one of the most respected actors of his generation. Police in New Mexico say Hackman and his wife were found dead yesterday in their home in Santa Fe. Their dog was also found dead. No cause of death has been established, but police have ruled out foul play. Jean Hackman was 95 years old. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
All right, thanks for the morning, Heather Wells.
Thank you.
All right, a final look at what's happening in the commute, Corey.
Southbound La Jamodiere at Regent, there is a stalled vehicle in the curb lane, so just keep left to get around that. Maybe some delays heading south on La Jamodiere this morning.
All right, and Abby, what do you want to say about the weather before we go?
Well, we have a mix of sun, cloud, light rain, blowing, freezing rain in a forecast today. Heavier snowfall actually in the central parts of the province. Rainfall mixed with snow will be more like featured in most of the southern regions. We're seeing -5s for Westman and the Parkland region, and Gimli's at -10 this morning. Winnipeg, we are at -8. It's sunny outside. We see some clouds roll in. We warm up to a high of 1 today.
All right, thanks a lot, Abby.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. Thanks to all of our guests this morning who made time for us on CBC, especially those who, joining us via Zoom and in studio. And big thanks to all of the producers and those that work in our current affairs unit here at CBC Manitoba. And thanks to you for listening. That is why we're here. I'm Marcy Marcusa with our team here at the show, and we'll be back again tomorrow with another edition of Information Radio on CBC. Coming up next on 89.3 FM, it's The Current. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.